Welcome to Cosmic Wand. Today's adventure. Wednesday Addams declared Harry her only equal and burned anyone who came near him alive. If you haven't already, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Now let's begin. Chapter 1. The transfer. The carriage that brought Wednesday Addams to Hogwarts did not run on horses. It ran on the straws, which was an improvement because she could see them and the driver could not. They were skeletal and patient, and they smelled faintly of cold meat, and when the great iron gates of the castle swung open to admit her, the lead Distral turned its blind skull toward her and regarded her with the only honest greeting she had received since crossing the Atlantic. She inclined her head a precise degree in return. Courtesy, she believed, was owed to anything that ate the dead. Rain hung in the air without falling. The lake below the cliffs lay flat and black, and the towers above it climbed into a sky the color of a bruise 3 days old. Wednesday Addams stepped down from the carriage onto wet gravel, and she did not look up at the castle the way the brochures clearly intended visitors to look up at the castle, mouth soft, eyes wide, undone by grandeur. She had been undone by nothing in 16 years and did not propose to begin with architecture. A woman in emerald robes waited at the foot of the steps. She was tall, severe, her mouth a horizontal line that had clearly outlawed frivolity sometime in the previous century. Wednesday approved of the mouth. Miss Addams. The woman's accent was Scottish granite. I am Professor McGonagall, Deputy Headmistress. You are expected. That is the first thing anyone has gotten right since Inverness, Wednesday said. McGonagall studied her, the twin black braids, the high collar buttoned to the throat, the trunk that 2 seventh-years were even now struggling to lift and very pointedly not asking for help with. Inside the trunk something shifted, scrabbled, and went still. Your luggage appears to be alive, McGonagall observed, only partly. A pale, articulate hand unlatched the trunk from within, raised the lid 2 inches, extended its index finger toward the deputy headmistress in a gesture that managed to be both a wave and a threat, and withdrew. The lid closed. The 7th-years dropped the trunk entirely and stepped back. That is thing, Wednesday said. He travels with me. He will not require a bed, a sorting, or a fork. He prefers not to be addressed unless he addresses you first. McGonagall, to her considerable credit, did not faint, did not call for a professor, did not so much as blink for longer than the situation strictly demanded. I see, she said. This way, Miss Addams. The headmaster wishes to see you before the sorting. They climbed the steps together, and Wednesday took the measure of Hogwarts the way she took the measure of most things, with a cold inventory. Old stone, older magic, the particular damp that meant centuries of accumulated death soaked into the foundations. She liked the death. She did not yet know whether she liked anything else. The headmaster's office sat at the top of a staircase that moved when she stepped on it, which she considered theatrical, and was crowded with instruments that whirred and steamed for no operational reason she could identify, which she considered worse. Man behind the desk had a beard like a frozen waterfall and eyes that twinkled, and the twinkle was the problem. Wednesday distrusted twinkle on principle. Twinkle was what predators did with their faces when they wanted you to forget what their faces were for. Wednesday Addams, said Albus Dumbledore, rising. Welcome. I knew your great-grandmother briefly in Vienna. She was a remarkable duelist. She killed 4 men in Vienna, Wednesday said. 3 of them deserved it, and the 4th was slow. Dumbledore's smile did not falter, which she noted. Most adults flinched at the casual arithmetic of her family. This one had merely catalogued it. He gestured to a chair. She did not sit. He resumed his own seat with the unhurried ease of a man who had learned long ago that he could afford to wait for anyone. Your family's request for a midterm transfer was unusual, he said. Most schools would have refused it. Most schools did, and yet here you are. My parents found the relocation necessary. She let the word lie there, necessary, without unwrapping it. Her father's business interests on the continent had attracted attention from parties who objected to the Addams family's hobbies, and there had been an incident involving an inquisitor, a sundial, and a remarkably high tide. Boarding school in the Scottish Highlands had been her mother's idea of discretion. Wednesday had agreed to it for one reason only. The library at Hogwarts was rumored to keep a section that other schools would have burned. I have requirements, she said. I will state them once. I sleep with the window open regardless of weather. I require access to the restricted section, and I do not wish to be befriended. The first I can grant, Dumbledore said. The second with supervision. The third, the twinkle deepened, and she liked him slightly less, is not, in my experience, a thing one can arrange in advance. People are unpredictable in their affections. People are predictable in everything, Wednesday said. That is the tragedy of them. He looked at her for a long moment then, and the twinkle went out of his eyes the way a candle goes out all at once, leaving something older and colder behind it, and for that one moment she thought she might be able to respect him. You will find, he said quietly, that this castle has a way of surprising even those who have decided not to be surprised. I hope, Miss Addams, that you allow it the chance. I allow nothing chances, she said. Chances are how the unprepared describe their mistakes. The sorting happened in front of the entire school, which she found tasteless, like being asked to undress for a committee. The great hall stretched the length of a cathedral, 4 long tables packed with students in 4 colors of trim, the ceiling overhead a churn of false storm clouds that flickered with lightning that gave no thunder. 1,000 faces turned toward her as she walked the central aisle alone, her boots loud on the flagstones, and she walked it the way her grandmother had taught her to walk into a room full of enemies, slowly and as though already bored by their funerals. A 4-legged stool waited at the front beneath a hat so old and creased it looked like a face that had given up. McGonagall held it out. Wednesday sat. The hat came down over her eyes and the world went the brown of ancient felt, and a voice spoke inside her skull. "Oh," it said. "Oh, you are a cold one, I am aware," Wednesday thought. "There's a great deal of dark in here," the hat went on, and she felt it picking through the rooms of her mind like a thief with a lantern opening doors. "And a great deal of cleverness, more than you let the world see. And ambition, yes, but not for gold, not for office. You want, do not say it aloud. To be unmatched," the hat finished in the privacy of her thoughts. "You want to meet your equal, and you have decided at 16 that none exists. That is not ambition, child. That is loneliness wearing ambition's coat." Wednesday's spine did not change. Her face, visible below the brim to the watching hall, did not change. But something behind her sternum contracted once like a fist, and she despised the hat for finding the one room she kept locked. "Put me in Slytherin," she thought, "and we will both pretend this conversation never occurred. Slytherin would have you, so would the dark heart of Ravenclaw. But I wonder Slytherin," she thought again, and this time she pushed, the way her mother had shown her, a flat, cold pressure against the intruding mind, and the hat made a sound that was almost a gasp. "Very well," it said aloud now to the hall. "If you insist, Slytherin." The green-trimmed table applauded because they were expected to, but the applause was thin and uncertain, and she catalogued the uncertainty as she rose. They did not know what they had been given. That was acceptable. She would teach them. She did not smile. She walked to the Slytherin table and sat at the end of it, alone, in the gap that the other students made for her without deciding to, and she ate nothing, and she watched the hall over the rim of a goblet she did not drink from. That was when she first saw the boy at the Gryffindor table who was watching her back. He was not staring the way the others stared. The others stared the way livestock stares at a wolf, wide, dumb, faintly hoping the wolf will choose a different field. This boy watched her the way she watched everyone, as a problem to be solved, then either dismissed or revisited. Black hair that had given up on order, glasses, a thin scar at the hairline that the false lightning kept finding, and green eyes, a green she had only ever seen in one other place, which was the bottle of poison her aunt kept on the highest shelf, the one that was beautiful precisely because of what it could do. For 3 full seconds they looked at each other across the width of the great hall, 2 people in 1,000 who were not pretending, and then a red-haired boy beside him said something and the green-eyed boy turned away to answer, and the moment closed. Wednesday set down her undrunk goblet. "That one," she said to no one, to Thing, who had crept up the inside of her sleeve to perch on her shoulder beneath the high collar. "Who is that one?" Thing tapped her collarbone twice. "Don't know." "Find out," she said. Hand was gone before the goblet finished settling. His name, she learned within the hour, was Harry Potter, and the wizarding world had a religion built around him. She found this out the way she found out most things, by listening to people who did not know they were being listened to. The Slytherin common room that first night was a low greenlit cavern beneath the lake, and it was full of opinions about Harry Potter, most of them delivered in the tone reserved for celebrities one has decided to resent. He had survived a curse as an infant that had killed the most powerful dark wizard of the age. He had a scar. He had, depending on the speaker, either an unbearable arrogance or no personality at all. He had survived a basilisk, a horde of soul-eating wraiths, a tournament designed to kill grown men. He was famous and he was orphaned, and he was, in the considered judgment of the Slytherin 7th year, holding court by the fire, an overrated little nothing who got lucky and won't stop being thanked for it. Wednesday listened to all of this from the shadows of a high-backed chair, unmoving, and at the end of it she had assembled a different picture than the one the speaker intended. A boy who had been targeted by death since infancy and had not died, a boy who survived, repeatedly, catastrophically. The wizarding world called this luck because luck was a comfortable thing to believe. Luck implied that the survivor was ordinary, that anyone might have done it, that the world remained an orderly place where children did not contain anything that could frighten a grown wizard. Wednesday did not believe in luck, she believed in capacity. A thing that survives 4 attempts on its life is not lucky. A thing that survives 4 attempts on its life is difficult to kill, and the people around it have simply declined to ask why. "You there?" The 7th year had noticed her at last. He was broad, blunt-featured, a prefect's badge on his chest he wore like a small sun he expected others to orbit. "The transfer, Addams. You're in my house now, so let's get the introductions over with. I'm Cassius Yaxley. I run things more or less for the people in this house who matter." His eyes did the thing that men's eyes did, traveling, assessing, pricing. "You're not what they sent in the letter. Letter made you sound dangerous." "The letter undersold me," Wednesday said. A few of the others laughed, the nervous laugh of people who weren't sure if it was permitted yet. Cassius did not laugh, he smiled, which was different. I like that, he said. Confidence. We can use confidence. Sit with us tomorrow. I'll introduce you to some people worth knowing. There's a society invitation only, the right sort that I think you'd suit. I do not suit, Wednesday said. I am suited by others briefly before they reconsider. She rose, and she left him there with his small son of a badge, and she went down the cold corridor to the dormitory she would be sharing with 5 girls who were already, by lamplight, conspicuously deciding to be afraid of her. She lay in the narrow bed nearest the window, which she had opened to the freezing lake air as promised, and she stared at the green water pressing against the ancient glass, and she thought about the boy with the poison-green eyes and the way he had looked at her like a problem. She did not yet know that she would burn for him. She knew only that, for the first time in a long time, she was curious. And in the Addams family, curiosity and danger had always been the same emotion wearing 2 faces. Sleep, when it came, brought the dream. It came the way her visions always came, sideways and without permission, not a picture but a place sudden and total, the smell of it first, stone, tallow, underneath both, the green copper smell of blood that had been left to think about itself. She stood in a round chamber she did not recognize, deep, windowless, ringed with carvings that moved when she did not look at them directly. A circle had been drawn on the floor in something dark. In the center of the circle a figure knelt, bound, head bowed, and she could not see his face, but she knew the shape of the shoulders, knew the black hair, and around him candles guttered in a ring, and the carvings on the walls had begun to glow with a light the color of a wound. And there was fire, not the candle fire. A larger fire, a purposeful fire, and she understood without being told that some of it was hers, that she had brought it, would bring it, that in this place she would burn something to the foundations and call it justice. A voice she did not recognize was speaking words she could not hear in a language older than the stone. And the bound figure lifted his head at last, and the eyes that found hers across the circle were poison green, and his mouth moved around a single word, and the word was a name, and the name she woke. The window was still open, the lake still pressed its dark face to the glass. Thing had crept onto the pillow beside her and lay with 2 fingers resting against her wrist, taking her pulse, which had gone wrong in the night. It's nothing, Wednesday told him. Her voice did not shake. She had trained it not to years ago in a house where weakness was the only thing the family would not forgive. A new castle, new dead, they always crowd the first night. Thing did not move his fingers from her wrist. I said it's nothing, she said again. But she did not sleep again before dawn, and she did not open the locked room behind her sternum to examine why the name in the dream had felt less like a warning and more like a claim. They came for her the next morning, which she had expected, because cruelty in a boarding school ran on a timetable as reliable as the bells. There were 3 of them 5th years, and they cornered her in the disused stretch of corridor between the dungeons and the marble stair, where the portraits had gone to sleep or to other frames, and there were no adults and no witnesses. She had walked that stretch deliberately. A new predator learns the territory by finding where the territory has no eyes. Transfer, said the largest of them, a thick-necked boy with a signet ring he wore turned inward like a knuckle duster. His name, she would learn, was Bram Selwyn, and he was muscle for hire even at 15, and he had been told by someone older to find out what the Addams girl was made of. You sat at Yaxley's table last night and didn't say thank you. He noticed. He likes people to notice that he noticed. How exhausting for him, Wednesday said. The second boy laughed. The third did not, which marked him as the only one with instincts. Selwyn stepped in, close enough that she could smell the breakfast on him, and reached out and took hold of one of her braids, not hard, a tug, the gesture of a boy who has learned that touching a girl's hair without permission is a thing he is allowed to do. We just want to be friends, Selwyn said. The corridor went very cold, not metaphorically. The temperature dropped fast, a plunge that fogged their breath and frosted the inside of the windowpane, and the sleeping portraits stirred uneasily in their frames, and Bram Selwyn's grin began to curdle as he registered that the chill was coming off the girl in front of him the way heat comes off a stove. My hair, Wednesday said in a voice without any weather in it at all, is the only part of me that has never killed anything. I keep it for sentimental reasons. You are putting that record at risk. Is that a threat? Selwyn's voice cracked on the second word, which spoiled the effect he was going for. No, Wednesday said, it is a courtesy. The threat is behind you. Bram Selwyn turned his head because everyone turns their head. It is the oldest reflex there is, and that was when Thing dropped from the rafters onto the back of his neck. What followed took 4 seconds, and Wednesday did not move for any of them. The hand was a blur of articulated knuckles, a pinch to the nerve cluster beneath the ear that dropped Selwyn to his knees with a sound like a kettle, a vault to the second boy's face that closed his eyes for him. A final, almost leisurely flick that snapped the third boy's own wand out of his pocket and into Wednesday's waiting palm before he had finished deciding whether to run. He decided to run. It was the right decision, and Wednesday respected him for it. She crouched in front of Bram Selwyn, who knelt on the cold stone clutching his neck, breath sawing, and she examined his face the way she examined cadavers in her family's cellar, with interest and without mercy, and without the slightest trace of anger, which was the part that finally made him afraid. Tell Yaxley, she said, that I noticed that he noticed. Tell him I am not made of anything he has a use for. And tell him, she leaned in, and her black eyes were very steady, and somewhere under the cold a small flame she did not yet have a name for turned over in its sleep, that the next person who touches me without my consent will be returned to him in a vessel his mother can fit on a mantle. I am new here. I am establishing precedent. You are the precedent. Thank you for volunteering. She rose, dropped the third boy's wand into Selwyn's lap, and stepped over him, and thing flowed up her sleeve to its perch beneath her collar, and the corridor was already warming behind her by the time she reached the marble stair. She had not raised her voice. She had not drawn her wand. By lunch the entire school would know, and the version they told would be worse than the truth, and the worse version would do her work for her for weeks. That was the economy of fear, and Wednesday Addams had been balancing its books since she was old enough to hold a blade. Defense against the dark arts met in a high room that smelled of ozone and old fear, and the new professor was the kind of handsome that made Wednesday's skin want to leave the building. His name was Aldous Mercer. He was perhaps 40, with silver threading dark hair he wore slightly too long, and a face built for reassuring nervous parents, and a voice like warm oil poured slowly. He moved through the rows of desks as he spoke, and he touched nothing and looked at everything, and when his gaze passed over Wednesday, it lingered a half-second longer than the gaze of a man cataloging a new face, and then it moved on to the Gryffindor side of the room and lingered there, on one student in particular, a half-second longer still. Harry Potter sat in the third row with the red-haired boy on one side and a bushy-haired girl on the other who had clearly read the textbook twice and resented that there were not 3 volumes. Wednesday had taken the seat directly across the aisle, in the unclaimed gap that followed her everywhere now, and she spent the first 20 minutes of the lecture not listening to Aldous Mercer and instead watching Aldous Mercer watch Harry Potter. The professor watched the boy the way a jeweler watches a stone he has not yet been allowed to buy. Today, Mercer was saying, we discussed the principle of leverage. Most duelists, most wizards believe a fight is decided by power. The bigger wand, the stronger curse, the louder bang. He smiled, and the smile was very good, very practiced, and reached exactly as far as his cheekbones and no further. They are wrong. A fight is decided before it begins by the person who has correctly understood what the other person values and arranged for it to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Power is loud, leverage is quiet, and quiet, his eyes touched Harry again lightly like a hand over a banknote, always wins. Wednesday revised her estimate of Aldous Mercer upward, which was to say she became more certain he would need to die. To demonstrate, Mercer continued, a problem. Not a duel. I will not have first years splintered before lunch, but a problem. I will describe a tactical situation, and I want it solved aloud. There are no points for the obvious answer. He surveyed the room and let the silence build, and then he said, Mr. Potter, humor me. The bushy-haired girl's hand had already gone up. The red-haired boy slumped in preemptive sympathy. Harry Potter looked up from a parchment he had been not very secretly using to ignore the lecture, and Wednesday saw in the half-second before he composed his face something she recognized. The flat, fast assessment of a person who has learned that being called on by an adult is rarely a kindness. Then it was gone, smoothed over, replaced by an expression of mild, unbothered attention. Sir, Harry said. You are alone, Mercer said, beginning to circle, in a corridor. 3 opponents close from the front, wands drawn, competent but not exceptional. Behind you, a locked door you cannot open in time. To your left, a window, a 4-story drop, no broom. To your right, a suit of armor, decorative, enchanted to patrol but currently dormant. You have 1 shield charm's worth of focus before they overwhelm you. What do you do? The girl's hand strained higher. Mercer ignored it. Wednesday watched Harry Potter's face and timed him. Most students would have answered in under 2 seconds because most students answered the question they were asked. They would have said, shield the front, retreat, find an angle. They would have treated the 3 opponents as the problem. They would have lost. Mercer had built the problem to be lost. The locked door, the lethal window, the single shield were all there to herd a frightened mind toward the front, toward the 3 wands, toward defeat. It was an elegant little trap of a question, and the professor had aimed it very deliberately at one specific student in a room of 30, and Wednesday wanted to know why. Harry Potter did not answer in 2 seconds. He went still, not the frozen stillness of a mind that has stalled, but the loaded stillness of a mind that has stopped wasting motion. 3 seconds, 4. The girl beside him made a frustrated noise. Mercer's smile widened a fraction, anticipating the stumble. The armor, Harry said. The armor, Mercer repeated, neutral. You said it patrols. That means it responds to threat. It has a trigger condition. Intruders, drawn wands, raised voices, something. You built this problem so I'd look at the 3 wands in front of me. But the 3 wands aren't my problem. My problem is that I'm outnumbered, so I stopped being outnumbered. Harry's voice was even, unhurried, almost bored, and Wednesday found she had leaned forward a degree without deciding to. I don't shield the front. I throw my 1 charm at the armor, a reductor on its base, or better, a banishing charm to topple it into the corridor between me and them. Loud, sudden, a 400-pound enchanted threat suddenly active in an enclosed space. It triggers. Now there are 4 combatants and only one of them is looking at me. The 3 competent but not exceptional opponents have to deal with a suit of patrolling armor that doesn't care which side anyone's on. And while they're dealing with it, he glanced at the imaginary geography of the corridor, and Wednesday saw him see it, the whole thing the way she saw chessboards. I'm not at the window or the door at all. I'm walking straight through the gap I just made behind the armor the way they came in. They expected me to defend a position. The trick is to stop defending and make a new exit out of their own ambush. The room was silent. Mercer's smile had not moved, but something behind his eyes had, a recalculation, the look of a man who has dropped a coin to test its weight and discovered it is heavier than he priced. And if the armor turns on you, then I was going to lose anyway, and at least it's chaos instead of a firing squad, Harry said. You gave me 1 shield and 3 enemies and a 4-story drop. You didn't build that problem to be survived by playing fair, so I don't play the problem you built. I build a different one. For a long moment Aldous Mercer simply looked at Harry Potter, and Wednesday looked at Aldous Mercer looking, and she understood 3 things in quick sequence, the way tumblers fall in a lock. The first was that the professor had asked the question to measure something, and the measurement had come back high, and the man was pleased in a way that had nothing to do with teaching. The second was that Harry Potter was not, whatever the Slytherin common room believed, lucky. He had built a different problem. That was not luck. That was the single most interesting sentence Wednesday Addams had heard since arriving in this country, possibly since leaving it. And the third was that she had been wrong last night in the bottle-green dark of her dormitory to call her own interest mere curiosity, because curiosity was what she felt for new poisons and old graves and the structural integrity of high bridges. This was different. This was the particular, dangerous stillness she felt only in the half-second before a knife left her hand, the recognition that she had found a target worthy of the throw. Excellent, Mr. Potter, Mercer said softly. 10 points to Gryffindor. You think like a man who expects to be ambushed. I usually am, Harry said, and the bushy-haired girl beside him shot him a look that was equal parts pride and exasperation, and the red-haired boy muttered something that made Harry's mouth tug sideways, and for one moment the boy with the poison-green eyes looked, very nearly, like an ordinary boy with friends. Then his gaze drifted across the aisle, the way a person's gaze drifts when they feel themselves watched, and it found Wednesday Addams in her gap of empty seats, watching him with the flat black attention of a thing that has stopped pretending to do anything else. He did not look away. She did not look away, and in the space between the two of them, narrow as a corridor, quiet as leverage, something began that neither of them had chosen and neither of them would be able to stop. She found him after class because she had no patience for the slow archaeology of being introduced. He had peeled off from the red-haired boy and the bushy-haired girl with a word she didn't catch and had gone, alone, toward a stretch of empty cloister where the windows looked out on the gray churn of the lake. She intercepted him there, stepping out of a shadow with the silence she had practiced since she was old enough to follow her uncle into rooms he did not want followed into, and she had the grim pleasure of watching him not be startled. He had heard her, of course he had. He had a wand half-drawn before she finished, arriving low by his hip already angled, and he stopped it there when he saw her face. Not lowered, stopped, ready. You're the transfer, Harry Potter said. Addams. You've been watching me since the feast. It was not an accusation. It was an inventory, the same inventory she ran on everyone, and she understood that she was, at this moment, being measured by the only person in the castle equipped to measure her. I have been watching everyone since the feast, Wednesday said. You are merely the only one worth the eye strain. His mouth did something that was not a smile but was related to one distantly like a cousin. Should I be flattered or armed? Both. Flattery is a kind of weapon. You used one in there. She came closer into the gray light from the lake windows, and she let him see her looking at the place where his wand hung ready by his hip. You didn't lower it. You came out of a shadow without making a sound. Most people lower the wand when they recognize a 16-year-old girl. Most people, Harry said, haven't met as many 16-year-olds who have tried to kill them as I have. And there it was again, that flatness, the dry registering of a fact too well worn to bother dramatizing. You're not most people. You walked in here 3 days ago and the whole castle's already decided to be afraid of you, and you haven't done anything yet. That takes effort, or it takes being something. I'm trying to work out which. And your conclusion, haven't got one. That's why the wand's still up. Wednesday regarded him. Up close, the poison-green eyes were even more interesting than they had been across the hall. There was something behind them that the wizarding world's religion had clearly never looked at directly, a banked, patient depth, the look of a fire that has been told all its life to be a candle, and has agreed only because no one has yet given it a reason to be otherwise. She had grown up around power. Her family was a cathedral of it. She knew the smell of the least kind, and Harry Potter reeked of it, and the most fascinating part was that he did not seem to know. Mercer wants something from you, she said. The wand came up an inch. What do you know about Mercer? Nothing yet, but he asked you that question the way my aunt asks the goose whether it has had a pleasant life. He has decided you are worth a great deal, and he has decided it for reasons that have not been explained to you. There is a boy in my house, Cassius Yaxley, who runs an invitation-only society and who watched you across the Great Hall last night with the same expression. You are being appraised, Harry Potter, by at least 2 people who smile too well, and you have not noticed because you are accustomed to being appraised and have stopped finding it interesting. She tilted her head a precise degree. That is a mistake. The appraisals have changed character. The old ones wanted to thank you, these want to spend you. He was very still now, and the stillness was the loaded kind, the same loaded kind from the classroom, and she watched him take what she had said and turn it over and check it against things she could not see, things he had noticed, perhaps, and not yet weighted, a teacher's lingering look, a prefect's too warm invitation, the wrongnesses that accumulate around a person who is being hunted by patient men. She watched him decide that she was telling the truth. It took him under a second. He was fast. "Why are you telling me this?" Harry said. "You don't know me. Slytherins don't generally warn Gryffindors about anything except the location of their own knives." "I am not warning you," Wednesday said. "I do not warn. Warnings are charity, and I am not a charitable person. My family has a crest that specifically forbids it." She held his gaze. "I am informing you. There is a difference. A warning asks you to be careful. I am simply telling you what I see because," and here she paused because she was about to say a true thing, and true things cost her always a measure of the cold control she lived inside, "because you are the first person I have encountered in this country, possibly on this continent, who saw the trap in that classroom for what it was. Mercer built a problem designed to be lost. You did not lose it. You did not even play it. You looked at the shape of the thing and you built a different shape and you walked out through the wall of his assumptions, and I have been doing precisely that to people my entire life, and I have never once watched someone else do it to a room full of strangers without breaking a sweat." The lake light moved on his glasses. He did not speak. "So," Wednesday said, and her voice was very even, and underneath the evenness ran something she had not let run in a long time, a current with a temperature to it. "I am informing you of what you are because the men who smile too well have already worked it out and you apparently have not. You are not lucky, Harry Potter. Lucky is what the small call the dangerous when they need to sleep at night. You are difficult to kill. And the difference between those 2 facts is going to determine whether you survive the people who have decided to own you." For a long moment the only sound was the lake, slapping its gray self against the cliffs below. Then Harry Potter lowered his wand all the way deliberately, a choice rather than a relaxation, and slid it back into his sleeve, and looked at her with the poison-green eyes gone thoughtful and unafraid, and said the most interesting thing anyone had said to Wednesday Addams in years. "You looked at that problem in the classroom too. I saw you do it. You had the armor before I finished hearing the question. It was not a guess. It was a recognition, returned mirror to mirror. So you're not informing me about anything I'm going to thank you for, and you're not doing charity, and you're definitely not making a friend, because you said yourself you don't want one." His head tilted a precise degree, and she realized with something that was almost vertigo that he had tilted it the exact degree she tilted hers. "You came over here because you wanted to know if the thing you saw in that classroom was real. You wanted to know if I was as fast as you, didn't you?" Wednesday Addams was quiet. Across 16 years and 3 continents and 1 drowned inquisitor, very few people had ever surprised her. She kept a private list. It had 4 names on it, and 3 of the 4 were dead, and 2 of those she had killed herself. "Yes," she said, "and you are slower than me," Wednesday said, "by a margin, but the margin is the smallest I have ever measured." She let that stand because it was the highest compliment in her vocabulary, and she did not intend to repeat it. "It is also the first margin I have ever found interesting. Most people are not slower than me. Most people are not in the same race." Harry Potter looked at her, and something crossed his face that was not fear and was not flattery and was not the wary, practiced charm she'd watched him use on the professor. Something rower and more honest, and she recognized it because she had felt the cold edge of it herself, last night, lying awake under the green water. The startled, almost painful relief of a creature that has spent its whole life being the only one of its kind, and has just heard from across a corridor an answering call. "I'm going to be late for potions," he said. "You are. Snape takes points for breathing. I have heard." He started to go. Then he stopped 3 steps away and looked back at her over his shoulder, the lake light gray on the lenses, the scar a thin white line in the dark hair, and he said, "Whatever this is, whatever you decided I am, whatever you came over here to confirm, I want to be clear about one thing first." His voice did not rise. It did not need to. "I've spent my whole life being other people's project, the boy who lived, the chosen one, the weapon, the symbol, the thing everybody's already decided what to do with before I walk in the room. So if you've looked at me and decided I'm yours to figure out, yours to spend, you can get in the very long line, and you can expect the same answer all of them got, which is." Harry Potter smiled then, finally, properly, and it was not warm and it was not kind, and it was, Wednesday thought, the first genuinely dangerous thing she had seen him do. "No," he said. And he turned and walked off toward the dungeons, unhurried, unbothered, a boy the whole world had underestimated walking away from the one person in the castle who hadn't. And Wednesday Addams stood alone in the gray cloister light and discovered that the cold thing behind her sternum, the locked room, the loneliness in Ambition's coat, had cracked open exactly 1 degree. Not because he had agreed to be hers, because he had refused. She had spent her life among people who said yes to her out of fear, and yes out of ambition, and yes out of the particular cowardice that dressed itself as good sense. She had never once in 16 years been told no by someone she could not simply remove from the equation. And here was a boy with poison-green eyes and a leashed fire he didn't know he carried, who had looked at her across the smallest margin she had ever measured and told her no, and meant it, and walked away. Equal, she thought, and the word did not feel like an observation any longer. It felt like a verdict. It felt like the first line of something she would spend a great deal of blood to finish. Thing crept out from beneath her collar and tapped once against her jaw. A question. His name is Harry Potter, Wednesday told the hand, watching the empty corridor where the boy had been. And he told me no. Thing's fingers drummed uncertain against her throat. I know, Wednesday said. Her voice was perfectly level, her eyes were not. I have never wanted anything so much in my life. Harry was late to potions and lost Gryffindor 8 points for it and did not, for once, particularly care. He sat through Snape's lecture on the properties of Moonstone with his quill moving across the parchment and his mind somewhere else entirely, running the encounter back the way he ran everything back, not for the feeling of it, which he would deal with later or not at all, but for the information. He had learned to do this in the cupboard under the stairs, where there had been nothing to do but think, and he had refined it everywhere since. Take the event apart, find the moving pieces, work out who was using whom. The Addams girl was a problem with a lot of moving pieces. She had told him the truth in that corridor. He was nearly certain of it. Not because she seemed honest, she seemed like the least honest person he had ever met, in the sense that honesty implied a person who could imagine lying and chose not to, and Wednesday Addams gave the impression of someone for whom other people's reactions were simply not interesting enough to manage. That was the tell. Liars manage you. She hadn't managed him once. She had stated facts about Mercer and Yaxley and walked the conclusions right up to the edge and left them there, and every fact had clicked into place against something he'd already half noticed and set aside: the professor's lingering attention, the prefect's too warm smile, the wrongnesses gathering at the edges of his ordinary days like silt. She had seen in 3 days what he had been carefully not seeing for weeks, which meant either she was very good or she was part of it, or both. He didn't think she was part of it. That was instinct, not deduction, and he distrusted instinct, but he had stayed alive this long partly by knowing the difference between a hunter and someone who simply enjoyed watching the hunt. Wednesday Addams was the second kind. She had come over to confirm he was as fast as her, and when he'd told her no, told her he wouldn't be anyone's project, she hadn't gotten angry and she hadn't backed off. Something behind her black eyes had lit briefly like a struck match in a cellar, and Harry had walked away fast precisely because he'd recognized the look. It was the look he saw in the mirror on the rare mornings he let himself want something. Potter, Snape's voice, dry as chalk dust, from directly behind him. Since your moonstone has reduced itself to paste while you composed poetry, perhaps you can tell the class the consequence of substituting it improperly in a draft of peace. It induces the opposite effect, sir, Harry said, without looking up, without missing a beat, because part of his mind was always free for exactly this kind of ambush. Agitation instead of calm. The wrong ingredient applied with confidence doesn't do nothing. It does the reverse of what you wanted, and faster because you've stopped watching for it. Snape's lip curled. 5 points for the answer, 5 from Gryffindor for the editorializing. He swept on. Harry returned to his ruined moonstone, and the sentence he'd just said arranged itself, without his permission, into a description of the girl in the corridor. The wrong ingredient applied with confidence does the reverse of what you wanted, faster because you've stopped watching for it. Mercer and Yaxley were watching him. He'd let them because being watched was the water he swam in, and he'd long ago stopped feeling it. He had a feeling, cold and not entirely unpleasant, that Wednesday Addams was about to be the ingredient none of them had watched for. He decided he would let her be. And he decided, dipping his quill, that he would also carefully, on his own terms, as an equal and not a recruit, find out everything there was to know about the Auspex circle before it found out anything more about him. Two could appraise. He'd been letting the wrong people do it for free. Far above them, in a high office full of whirring instruments, an old man with a frozen waterfall beard paused over a silver device that had begun, faintly, to glow. A device that measured the gathering of certain energies in certain places, and that had been quiet for years and was quiet no longer. And far below them, in a windowless room that did not appear on any map the students were permitted to see, a circle had already been drawn on the floor in something dark, and was waiting, with the terrible patience of the carved walls around it, to be filled. But that was still weeks away. Tonight there was only a girl in a cold corridor who had finally met her match, and the slow, certain, irreversible turning of her attention toward him, the way a great door turns toward a single room, and the fire she did not yet know she carried banking itself against the day it would be needed. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. The claim Cassius Yaxley made his move on Harry Potter on a Tuesday, in the most public place in the castle, which told Wednesday everything she needed to know about how the man intended to win. She watched it begin from the Slytherin table. The great hall at breakfast was a churning organism of 400 students and the noise of cutlery, and into it Cassius walked with 2 sixth-years flanking him and his prefect's badge catching the light off the enchanted ceiling, and he made a straight line for the Gryffindor table and the boy with the black hair. He did not slink, he did not corner. He arrived in the open, smiling, a hand extended, where everyone could see that the great Cassius Yaxley was being generous to the famous orphan, and where if Harry declined, the declining would be public, ungrateful, and remembered. Leverage, Wednesday thought. Mercer had taught the principal on Monday and his prefect was demonstrating it on Tuesday, which meant the lesson had not been for the class at all. Potter, Cassius's voice carried, pitched for an audience. We haven't properly met. I've been meaning to fix that. There's a society I run, the Auspex Circle. Dueling, advanced theory, the kind of magic the curriculum's too timid to teach. We take the best, regardless of house. He let the regardless of house land like a coin dropped in a collection plate. Frankly, it's an embarrassment you haven't been invited already. I'd like to correct it. Thursday after dinner, you'd be doing us the honor. It was beautifully built. Wednesday gave it that. Refuse, and you were the arrogant celebrity who thought himself above his peers. Accept, and you walked through a door of another man's making and let it close behind you. Harry Potter set down his fork. That's a generous offer, he said, and his voice did not carry, he did not raise it, did not perform, which forced the watching hall to lean in to hear him, so that the silence spread outward from him like a ring on water, and Wednesday felt something behind her sternum tighten with a sensation that was almost pride. I've heard about the circle, invitation only, the right sort. He picked up his cup, unhurried. Here's my difficulty, Yaxley. Every time someone's wanted me in a room lately, it's been because of what I am to them, not who I am. Trophy, symbol, recruit. So before I say yes to a society that takes the best regardless of house, I want to know what the circle gets out of having me in it. Specifically, because a man doesn't cross a crowded hall to honor a stranger. He crosses it because the stranger is useful and he hasn't decided to tell the stranger how. The smile on Cassius Yaxley's face did not move. The eyes above it did. You're a suspicious one, Cassius said lightly. I'm an experienced one, Harry said. It's a common mistake. And there it was, the whole hall watching, the prefect's gambit hanging in the air, deflected not with a refusal that could be punished, but with a question that could not be answered honestly, and Wednesday understood that Harry had not refused at all. He had simply made Cassius's leverage useless by declining to stand where it pointed. The boy had built a different problem. Again, in front of 400 people before lunch, she was on her feet before she had decided to be. She did not remember crossing the gap between the tables. She remembered the silence changing texture as she entered it. The casual silence of people watching a sport became the held silence of people watching a blade leave its sheath, and she remembered the precise moment Cassius Yaxley's attention swung from Harry to her and recalculated fast and got the sum wrong. He's considering it, Cassius said to her, recovering, reaching for the easy thing. You were just leaving, Wednesday said. She did not look at Cassius when she said it. She was looking at Harry, and Harry was looking at her with an expression she would spend some time afterward trying to name, wary, amused, and underneath both a flat, assessing patience, the look of a man watching to see what a dangerous animal would do before he decided whether to reach for his wand. He had not asked for her help, she knew that. She knew distantly in the part of her that understood people as systems, that what she was about to do would cost her something with him, that he had just spent 90 seconds proving he needed no one to fight his battles, and that she was about to step on the proof. She did it anyway. That was the thing she would examine later, alone in the cold under the lake. She did it anyway because the sight of Cassius Yaxley's hand extended toward Harry Potter like a man reaching into a cage had produced in her a sensation she had no file for, hot and total and without reason, and the sensation had picked her up out of her seat and carried her across the hall before her judgment could file an objection. Listen carefully, Wednesday said, and now she did turn to Cassius, and she pitched her voice exactly as he had pitched his for the room. Because I will say this once, and I will not enjoy repeating myself, and you will not enjoy what repeating myself requires. The hall was utterly silent now. Even the cutlery had stopped. There are 400 people in this room, Wednesday said, and I have catalogued every one of them in the time it took you to walk over here, and there is exactly one I find interesting. She did not gesture at Harry. She did not need to. The whole hall's attention bent toward him on its own, the way iron lanes toward a magnet. He is not a recruit. He is not a trophy. He is not a resource your little society can spend to make itself feel large. He is the only person I have met on this continent who is my equal, and I have decided, for reasons that are mine, and that I will not be explaining to a boy who wears his authority like a hat he is afraid will blow off, that he is under my attention now. Permanently, do you understand what I am telling you? Cassius's jaw worked. I'm sure I don't. I am telling you that he is mine. The words landed in the silence like stones into a well, and Wednesday felt the room flinch as one body, and somewhere down the Hufflepuff table a fork hit a plate, and the sound was enormous. Not a possession. I want that precise. He belongs to no one, least of all me. He would set fire to the suggestion, and I would let him. He is mine the way the north is the compasses, a fixed thing I have oriented toward. And anyone in this castle who approaches him as prey, who reaches into the cage, who smiles too well, who decides he is theirs to spend, will learn the difference between my attention and my wrath, and they will learn it in a manner that the survivors describe in lowered voices for the rest of their natural lives. She let that sit. That is the whole of it, she said, in the conversational tone of a woman remarking on weather. You may go now. For a moment Cassius Yaxley stood very still, and Wednesday watched him perform the calculation every intelligent predator performs when it meets a larger one unexpectedly. The cost of retreat against the cost of the fight, the audience, the loss of face, the unknown depth of the thing in front of him. He was clever. He chose correctly. He smiled, a real smile this time, a smile that conceded the round and promised the match, and he inclined his head to her with a courtesy that was its own kind of threat. Miss Addams, he said, I see I underestimated the transfer. That won't happen twice. His eyes moved to Harry just once, and the look in them was no longer warm and no longer pretending to be. Potter, the offer stands. It'll stand longer than you might think. He walked away, his 2 seventh years trailing, and the hall released its held breath in a long rolling murmur, and 400 faces turned as one to look at the girl who had stood up at breakfast and claimed the boy who lived like territory. And Harry Potter looked at her too, and the expression on his face was not gratitude. It was the cold, level fury of a man who has just been made smaller in front of an audience, and Wednesday, who had been right about everything in the room except the one thing that mattered, understood that she had won the wrong war. He did not say a word. He picked up his bag and he rose and he walked out of the great hall without looking back, and the silence he left behind him was somehow louder than anything she had said. Wednesday stood alone in the gap between the tables, 400 pairs of eyes on her, and discovered that being feared by an entire castle was a poor substitute for being right. By that evening, the castle had reorganized itself around the new fact of her, and Wednesday observed the reorganization with the detached interest of a woman watching ice form. Slytherin took it worst, which she had expected. Her own house had spent a week deciding she was a useful kind of dangerous, a transfer with a reputation, a blade they might one day point at someone else's throat. Now she had stood up at breakfast and pointed herself publicly at a Gryffindor against their own prefect, and the house did not know whether to be furious or afraid, and settled, as houses do, on both. The 5 girls in her dormitory had stopped pretending not to be frightened of her and started pretending not to be in the room with her. Conversations died when she entered the common room. A space opened around her at the long green table that was wider than the space that had opened on her first night, and she understood that the width was not respect now but quarantine. She found she did not care, and the not caring was itself a piece of information. A week ago, the house's verdict would have been a system to be managed, a set of levers to be understood and pulled. Now it was simply weather, and she walked through it the way she walked through actual weather, unbothered, because the only opinion in the castle that had become load-bearing was a boy's, and he was not at this table, and the rest of it could freeze. Cassius Yaxley made one more attempt that evening in the common room in front of the house, because a man who has lost face in the great hall must be seen to recover it somewhere his own people can watch. You've made an enemy of your whole house, he told her, pitched for the room. For a Gryffindor, for the Potter boy who'll drop you the moment he's used you. You don't know him, Addams, you've known him 3 days. I have known him 3 days, Wednesday agreed, not looking up from the book she was not reading. In 3 days he told me no twice, refused to be owned, dismantled your trap in the great hall without raising his voice, and declined to thank me for an intervention he never asked for. In 3 days he has been more honestly himself in front of me than this entire house has managed in a week of deciding what I am behind my hand. She turned a page. You are correct that I do not know him, Cassius. I have simply met him, which is more than anyone in this room has done with anyone, including themselves. Go away. You are blocking the fire, and I am cold, and unlike everyone else at this table, I do not find that an improvement. The house did not laugh because the house was afraid to. But she felt the temperature of the room shift a degree in her favor anyway, not warmth, never warmth, but the recalibration of 40 frightened, ambitious people realizing that the prefect had just been dismissed by the transfer in front of all of them, and that the prefect had let it happen, and that the arithmetic of power in Slytherin house had quietly, permanently changed. Cassius Yaxley felt it too. She watched him feel it. And she understood that she had made the second enemy of the day, and that this one would not write not yet in fire on a floor. This one would smile and wait and look for the longer knife, and she added him to the list of things she would account for before the new moon. She found him that evening in the one place she had learned he went to be unfound. The restricted section closed at curfew, but Wednesday had a way of being where she was not permitted, and the librarian's wards parted for her the way most defenses parted for her, with the reluctant cooperation of systems that recognized a predator and preferred not to test it. He was at a table in the far stacks, beneath a window where the moon laid a cold bar of light across the wood, a stack of books in front of him and a sheet of parchment covered in his own cramped handwriting, and he did not look up when she arrived. "You found the Auspex Circle in the catalog," she said, reading the spines from across the room. "Founding charter, society register, the names of its patrons." She came closer. "You started hunting them this morning, before breakfast." "Before I made a fool of you both, you made a fool of one of us," Harry said. He still did not look up. His voice was even, which was worse than if it had not been. "And it wasn't Yaxley. I am aware. Are you?" Now he did look up, and the moon was cold on the lenses, and behind them the green eyes were colder. "Because I want to understand what happened this morning, Addams, and I want to understand it precisely, because I don't make the same mistake twice, and I'd hate to have to count you as one." I spent 90 seconds turning Yaxley's trap into a question he couldn't answer, quietly, in a way that cost him and cost me nothing. I was winning, and then you stood up and announced to 400 people that I belonged to you. I said you belonged to no one. I was specific. You said I'm yours. Harry's voice did not rise, it sharpened. "You can put whatever footnotes on it you like. You can build a beautiful little distinction between attention and ownership, and I'm sure it's very precise, and I'm sure you believe it. But 400 people didn't hear the footnotes. They heard the Slytherin transfer claim the famous orphan in the middle of breakfast like a dog marking a tree, and tomorrow that's the story, and the story is that Harry Potter, who has spent 6 years being everybody's symbol, everybody's project, everybody's thing, has been collected, again by you this time." He set down his quill. "I told you no. 11 hours ago in a corridor I told you no, and you nodded like you understood, and then you got up at breakfast and did it anyway, louder in public, where I couldn't say no without it being a scene. So no, I don't think you're aware. I think you got a feeling and you acted on it, and you're clever enough to dress the feeling up as a favor." The silence in the stacks was very deep. Wednesday Addams had been spoken to in many ways across 16 years. She had been threatened by professionals, cursed by relatives, sentenced by a tribunal in 3 languages. She had never in any of those rooms felt the particular discomfort she felt now, which was the discomfort of being seen accurately by someone she could not dismiss. He was right, that was the intolerable part. He had taken her morning apart the way she took rooms apart, found the moving piece and named it. She had gotten a feeling and acted on it. The feeling had a shape she had refused to look at directly, hot and possessive and entirely without strategy, and he had looked at it for her and held it up to the cold moonlight, and she found she could not deny it without lying, and she did not lie. "Yes," she said. He blinked. Whatever he had braced for, it had not been agreement. "You are correct," Wednesday said. "I had a feeling and I acted on it. I do not do that. I have not done that since I was 9 years old and learned what it costs. This morning I watched Cassius Yaxley reach his hand toward you as though you were a thing on a shelf, and I experienced a sensation for which I have no precedent and no control, and it moved me out of my chair before my judgment could object, and I said true things in a damaging way to an audience that should never have heard them, and in doing so I made you, in the eyes of this castle, the precise thing you have spent your life refusing to be." She held his gaze in the cold bar of moonlight. "I have spent the day examining the error. It was an error. I am telling you that it was an error because you are owed the truth and because I find I would rather be correct with you than comfortable. So, I was wrong. I will not pretend otherwise, and I will not apologize, because apology is a performance for people who want to feel better, and you do not strike me as a person who wants to feel better. You strike me as a person who wants to understand the system that just failed him. The system was me. I have shown you the broken part." Harry Potter stared at her. "That," he said slowly, "is the strangest apology I have ever received. It was not an apology. I just said, I know what you said." Something had changed in his face. The cold fury had not gone, but it had been joined by something else, something reluctant and surprised, the look of a man who had walked into a room expecting an argument and found a confession instead. "You really don't lie, do you? Most people, caught the way I just caught you, would have told me I was overreacting, or that they were protecting me, or that I should be grateful." He studied her. "You just said you were wrong and showed me the gears. Who taught you to do that? No one. It is simply that I find people's reactions less interesting than the truth, so I have never developed the habit of managing them. It is, I am told, my least charming quality." "It's the only charming thing you've done since I met you," Harry said, and the words surprised them both, and a silence fell in the stacks that was different from the silences before it, not hostile, not held, but charged, the silence of 2 people standing close to a thing neither of them had a name for. Wednesday pulled out the chair across from him and sat. She did not ask permission. He did not offer it, but he did not tell her to leave either, and she understood that this, too, was information. Then let us be precise, she said. Since precision is the only currency either of us respects, I cannot undo this morning. The story is loose in the castle, and stories do not return to their tellers. But I can offer you terms, and you can refuse them, and if you refuse them, I will leave this section and not trouble you again, and we will simply be two predators in the same forest, occasionally crossing paths. She folded her hands on the table. Those are not the terms I want. What are the terms you want? An alliance. She said it flatly, the way she said everything that mattered. Not ownership. You have made your position on ownership exhaustively clear, and you are right, and I withdraw the framing. An alliance between equals. You are being hunted by patient men. So I now suspect, am I, by association, which I find acceptable, because being hunted is the most interesting thing that has happened to me in months. You are clever and underestimated and powerful in a way you keep on a leash. I am clever and overestimated and powerful in a way I do not. Apart, we are each a problem the circle believes it can solve. Together, and here, against every instinct she had, she let him see the cold edge of what she actually felt. Together, we are a problem they will not survive having created. I am proposing that we stop being two people the men who smile too well are appraising separately, and become one thing they cannot price at all. Harry was quiet for a long moment. The moon had moved, the cold bar of light had slid off the parchment and onto his hands. Equal, he said. You keep using that word, because it is the only one that fits. I do not have many words for people. Most people require only one, usually tedious. You require that one. I am not in the habit of spending it. I have spent it exactly once in my life before you, and that person is dead, and I killed the people who killed them, and I do not regret it, and I would do it again. She held his eyes. I am telling you this so that you understand the weight of the offer. When I say you are my equal, I am not flattering you. I am informing you that you have walked into the single most dangerous category I possess. The people I have catalogued as equals I do not let the world touch. This morning was the broken, public, idiot version of that instinct. The alliance is the version that has thought it through. And if I touch the world back, Harry said, if I do something you don't like, if I make a move you didn't sign off on, are you going to stand up in another hall and announce me? No, the answer was immediate and total. An equal does not require sign-off. That is what the word means. If you make a move I did not predict, I will be delighted, because it is so rarely done. If you make a move I disagree with, I will tell you I disagree with it, in private, with reasons, and then I will help you execute it anyway, because the alliance is not contingent on your agreeing with me. It is contingent only on this, that when they come for you, and they are coming, Harry, the instruments in the headmaster's office have started glowing and the circle under the castle is already drawn. When they come for you, they find me standing beside you, and they understand too late that they have made a catastrophic error in arithmetic. She paused. And that when they come for me, you do the same. That is the whole of it. That is the only clause. Harry Potter looked at her across the table in the moving moonlight for a long time. You said the circle under the castle is already drawn, he said finally. How do you know that? And Wednesday Addams, who did not lie, who had spent the entire conversation establishing that she did not lie precisely so that this moment would land with its full weight, told him the truth. Because I have seen it, she said. I am a seer. It runs in my family, the way the dark does, the way the cold does. I do not choose what I see, and I cannot stop it, and it is not a gift. It is a tenant I did not invite who refuses to pay rent. 2 nights ago, my first night in this castle, I dreamed a round chamber deep underground, a circle drawn in something dark, and a figure kneeling bound in the center of it with his head bowed. And there was fire, and the figure lifted his head. She did not look away from him, and his eyes were the color of the poison my aunt keeps on the highest shelf. And he said a name, and I woke before I heard which one, but I have since formed a theory about whose name it was, and the theory is the reason I lost control of myself at breakfast, and I am telling you all of it now, every piece, because you said you wanted to understand the system, and this is the part of the system that frightens even me. The restricted section was silent. Somewhere far off a clock counted. You dreamed me, Harry said quietly, bound in a ritual circle with fire. I dreamed someone with your eyes. I am a careful person, and I will not claim more than I saw. A pause. But I have never had eyes like that appear in a vision and be a stranger's. The dark is many things. It is rarely coy. Harry sat back. He took off his glasses and pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes, and for a moment he looked, not like the boy who lived or the equal she had crossed an ocean's worth of loneliness to find, but simply like a tired 17-year-old who had been told too many times that the universe had selected him for something he never asked for. Then he put the glasses back on, and the tiredness was gone, folded away somewhere she could not see, and the flat, tactical patience was back. Right, he said. Then we have less time than I thought, and you have a vision that says I end up bound in a circle, and a society of patient men is reaching into my cage, and you've just offered me the only alliance in this castle worth having, in the strangest conversation I've ever had after the most humiliating morning I've had in years. He looked at her. I should say no. I told you 11 hours ago that I'd been everybody's project, and I meant it. You're asking me to let one more person have a claim on me, and you dressed it up beautifully, and I noticed you dressed it up. I did, Wednesday agreed. It is a real flaw in the offer. I do not know how to want something without it looking like ownership. I am working on it. You will have to be patient with the construction. And Harry Potter laughed. It was not a large laugh. It was startled out of him, low and rough and disbelieving, and it was the most genuine sound she had heard since the carriage. And Wednesday Addams sat very still in the moving moonlight and felt the cold thing behind her sternum crack open a second degree, and she did not file the sensation away or examine it or armor against it. She simply let it be there briefly in the dark where no one could see it but the boy who had put it there. All right, Harry said when the laugh had passed. Here are my terms since we're being precise. He leaned forward. 1, we're equals or we're nothing. You don't manage me, you don't protect me, you don't decide what I can handle. If you think I'm walking into something, you tell me with reasons, and then you let me walk into it if I choose to, and you walk in beside me. 2, no more breakfasts. Whatever this is, it happens where we choose, not where an audience makes it a performance. 3, and here his voice dropped, and the green eyes held hers, and Wednesday understood that whatever he said next would be the truest thing in the conversation. If it comes to the thing your vision showed you, if they get me into that circle. You don't trade yourself for me, you don't burn down the castle to reach me. You don't do anything that gets you killed to save me, because I am not worth more than you, and I will not have my survival built on your funeral. Get out together or we make them very sorry, but we do not do the noble idiot thing where one of us dies so the other can grieve heroically. Agreed, Wednesday looked at him. No, she said. He blinked. You may have the first 2 terms, Wednesday said. They are correct and I accept them without reservation. The third I reject, and I reject it for the same reason you offered it, which is that it is the truest thing either of us has said tonight, and I will not lie to you, not even to close a deal. She held his gaze. If they get you into that circle, Harry Potter, I will come for you. I will not weigh my life against yours because I have already weighed it 2 nights ago, the moment I saw your eyes lift in the dark and the scale settled, and it is not a thing I can reweigh now that it is set. I will not promise to be careful. I will not promise to survive. I will promise only this, that whoever puts you in that circle will burn for it, and that the fire will be the last thing they understand, and that I will be the one who lights it. Those are my terms. You may refuse them, but they are the only ones I have because they are the only ones that are true. The clock counted far off in the dark. And Harry Potter, who had spent his life refusing to be anyone's project, who had told her no twice and meant it both times, who understood better than anyone alive what it cost to be wanted for what you were instead of who, looked across the table at the strange, cold, lethal girl who would not lie to him even to win, and made the decision that would define the rest of the year. That's a terrible deal, he said. It's unbalanced, it's reckless, and it commits you to dying stupidly for someone who explicitly told you not to. Yes, it's also, he said, the first time anyone's ever offered me something without wanting me smaller for it. He extended his hand across the table into the moonlight. An echo of Cassius Yaxley's gesture from breakfast turned entirely inside out, not a hand reaching into a cage, but a hand offered to an equal across a table both of them had chosen. Alliance, equals. On the record that there is no record, deal. Wednesday Addams looked at the offered hand. She did not take it immediately. She had learned very young that a handshake was a contract, and a contract was a thing the dark would hold you to, and she wanted to be certain for his sake, not hers, that he understood what he was reaching into. Then she took it. His grip was warm, hers was cold, neither of them flinched. Deal, she said. Somewhere above them, the silver instrument in the headmaster's office glowed a half-shade brighter, and the old man who watched it frowned and made a note, and did not yet understand that the energy he was measuring was not the gathering of the enemy at all, but the binding of the 2 students who would undo them. A different kind of circle, drawn in the restricted section by moonlight, in something stronger than blood. 2 floors above the trophy room, in an office that smelled of cedar and old parchment, Aldous Mercer poured 2 glasses of a wine that had been bottled before either of his guests was born, and considered the problem of the Addams girl. You moved too early, he said. Cassius Yaxley took the offered glass and did not drink from it, which Mercer noted with approval. The boy had at least learned that much. I moved on schedule. Potter was meant to be flattered into the circle by the end of the month. Blick invitation, a few weeks of letting him feel chosen, then the rest. It was working. It was working, Mercer agreed, until a 16-year-old necromancer stood up at breakfast and announced that she had drawn a line around the boy and would burn anyone who crossed it. He swirled the wine. Tell me about her, not the rumors, what you have seen. She put Bram Selwyn on his knees in a corridor without drawing her wand. She read my whole approach in the great hall before I finished making it. And in the trophy room tonight, Cassius's jaw tightened. She pulled our warning fire out of the air and snuffed it between 2 fingers in front of the scrying on purpose as a message. She wanted us to know she could take the fire away from us. Yes, Mercer said softly. I watched. That was the most interesting thing I have seen in this castle in a decade. He set down his glass. Do you understand what she is, Cassius? She is a born conduit like the boy. The right needs a vessel of great power and an anchor of great will, and I have spent 2 years cultivating Potter as the vessel. And now the universe, in its generosity, has delivered an anchor to the same castle and walked her directly into the boy's orbit. He smiled, and the smile reached exactly as far as his cheekbones. I asked the circle to find me a way to make Potter willing. I no longer need one. I need only to make the girl believe he is about to be taken from her. She has already shown us she will burn the world to keep him. A person who will burn the world is a person who can be aimed. Cassius was quiet for a moment. You want to use the thing protecting him. I want to use everything, Mercer said. That is the principle of leverage. You do not fight what the target values. You arrange for it to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. He raised his glass at last, a small toast to no one. Let them have their alliance, Cassius. Let it deepen. Let her care. The more she binds herself to him, the better a handle she becomes. We are not building a trap for one student anymore. We are building a trap for two, and the beauty of it is that they will build half of it themselves out of exactly the thing they think will save them. He drank. Find me a Gryffindor, Mercer said. Someone close to the boy, someone with a weakness I can hold. When the time comes, I do not want to break down Potter's door. I want him handed to me by a friend so that the wound goes all the way down, because a vessel that has already been broken open by betrayal takes the binding far more deeply than one that is merely captured. He looked into the fire. Grief is a solvent, it dissolves the will, and I will need his will very thin indeed before the new moon. The second warning came 3 days later, and it was meant for both of them. It happened in the trophy room, where Harry had gone to meet her after hours to compare what they had each learned, she from the Slytherin common room, he from the catalogue, and from a fourth year he had quietly turned into a source. They had been talking in low voices among the glass cases of old victories when the door behind them sealed itself with a sound like a tomb closing, and the torches guttered down to embers and the temperature began to climb. Not cold this time. Heat. The air thickened, the glass of the trophy cases began to tick and craze, and across the floor, drawn in a substance that smoldered as it ignited, a crude circle bloomed into flame, not the elegant geometry of Wednesday's vision but a clumsy, threatening sketch of it, a message written in fire by someone who wanted them to know that the real thing existed. In the center of the burning circle, scorched into the stone, were 2 words, not yet. Charming, Wednesday said. She had her wand out, so did Harry. They had moved back to back without discussing it, which she noted with a flicker of cold satisfaction, the reflexes of an alliance 3 days old already faster than the friendships of years. Someone has read my dreams and decided to redecorate. It's a warning, Harry said, not an attack. If they wanted us dead, the door wouldn't be the only thing sealed. They want us to know they can reach us, and that they're choosing not to yet. They want us afraid and waiting. His eyes moved over the burning letters, fast, reading the room the way he read everything. Which means they're not ready, which means we have time, which means that this was a mistake on their part, Wednesday finished, because frightened people make errors, and they have just taught us that they would rather frighten us than finish us, and a predator that prefers theater to the kill is a predator with a weakness. He stepped to the edge of the burning circle, unbothered by the heat, and looked down at the words scorched into the stone, and something moved behind her black eyes that had no name in any language she spoke. Not yet, she read aloud. They should not have written that. They have told us there is a clock. People who tell you there is a clock have just handed you the most valuable thing in any conflict, which is the knowledge that they are working to a schedule, Wednesday said, and the certainty that we can ruin it. She raised her wand, and with a single cold word the fire went out, not extinguished, but pulled, the flames drawn up into a tight knot above her palm and then snuffed between 2 fingers, a deliberate demonstration of a control that the person watching through whatever scrying they had used would not fail to register. She wanted them to register it. She wanted the men who smiled too well to understand that the fire they had used to threaten her was a language she spoke fluently, and that the next time it appeared in a room it might not be theirs. The door unsealed itself. The torches climbed back to brightness. The trophy room was only a trophy room again, glass cases and old victories and 2 students standing very close together in the sudden, ordinary light. They're going to regret that, Harry said. Yes, Wednesday agreed. I have a great deal of experience in making people regret things. It is, I am told, my most charming quality. She looked at him, and the corner of her mouth did something that on another face would have been a smile, and on hers was simply a crack of light under a door. We should go, separately, let them wonder which of us put out the fire. That night the vision came again, and it was worse, and it was clearer. The round chamber, the circle, the bound figure with the bowed head and the black hair. But this time the vision drew back, the way her visions sometimes did when the dark decided she was ready for more, and she saw the ring of figures standing at the edge of the circle, hooded, faceless, and she saw at their head a tall man whose face she could not see but whose voice she now knew, warm as oil poured slowly, speaking words in a language older than the stone. And she saw something new. At the very edge of the chamber, half in shadow, a figure who was not hooded, who wore no robe, who stood apart from the circle and watched the bound boy with an expression Wednesday could almost make out, and in the figure's hand was a knife, ordinary, mundane, a kitchen blade, and the wrongness of it, the small human ordinariness of a kitchen knife in a chamber of cosmic ritual, was the most frightening thing in the dream. She tried to see the face above the knife. The dark would not let her. But she saw, just before she woke, that the figure with the knife was young, was her age, was a student, and that the bound boy in the circle, lifting his head, looked at the figure with the knife not with fear but with the particular wounded surprise of a person betrayed by someone he had trusted. Wednesday Addams woke in the cold dark beneath the lake, and she did not go back to sleep, and she did not tell Harry about the knife. Not yet. She told herself it was because the vision was incomplete, because she did not yet know the face, because she would not hand him a betrayal she could not name. All of that was true. But underneath the true reasons was a colder one, and she examined it once in the dark, and then sealed it back in the locked room behind her sternum where she kept the things that frightened her. That she had recognized the wounded surprise on the bound boy's face, and that she would do a great deal, burn a great deal, become a great deal, to make certain that no one ever put that expression on Harry Potter's face while she was alive to prevent it. The alliance was 3 days old. The clock had started. And somewhere in the castle, a student her own age was being measured for a knife. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. First burn they came for Harry on a Thursday, and they made the same mistake everyone made, which was to assume that the dangerous one was the girl. It was clever, as these things went. Wednesday would give it that afterward, in the cold accounting she did of all violence, hers and others. They did not move on him in a corridor where Thing might be watching from the rafters, or in a classroom where 100 witnesses might remember the wrong face. They moved on him on the Quidditch pitch at dusk after practice, when the rest of the Gryffindor team had trudged up to the castle, and Harry had stayed behind alone to run drills, as he did whenever he wanted to think with his body instead of his head. They moved on him when the only person who might have stood at his back was 200 yards away beneath the lake, and could not have come in time even if she had known. Wednesday did not know. That was the part she would not forgive. There were 4 of them, and Bram Selwyn led them, which told her later exactly who had sent them, because Selwyn was Cassius Yaxley's hand and Cassius Yaxley was Aldous Mercer's, and a chain of command is only as deniable as its weakest link. They came out of the equipment shed in the long evening shadows under the stands, 4 wands already up, and they did not announce themselves, because the lesson of the Great Hall had reached them too. Do not give Harry Potter time to turn your trap into a question. So they did not give him time. They gave him a curse instead, a flash of sickly yellow light from Selwyn's wand, fast, aimed not to kill but to drop, a body bind crossed with something nastier that Wednesday would later identify from the burns on his wrists as a binding hex tuned to a particular frequency, the kind a person uses when they intend to keep what they catch. It did not drop him. This is the part the wizarding world never understood about Harry Potter, the part Wednesday had seen in the first half-second across the Great Hall and named correctly. He was difficult to kill, and difficulty is a learned reflex before it is a gift. He had been ambushed his entire life. By a teacher with a stranger living in his skull, by a basilisk, by a graveyard full of the dead, by a tournament built to break grown men, and a creature that survives that many ambushes does not flinch when the 5th one arrives. It moves. Harry was already moving when the yellow light reached the place he had been. He had heard the shed door the same way Wednesday heard everything, with the trained paranoia of the perpetually hunted, and the curse hit the broom he had been holding instead of the chest he had been standing in, and the broom shattered into a spray of splinters and sickly light, and Harry came up out of the roll with his wand already speaking. He took the first one down before they understood he was loose. A reductor not at the boy, at the ground beneath the boy, a trick Wednesday would have admired, because the explosion of turf and stone threw the nearest attacker 10 feet and put him down hard and out, and turned the neat 4-on-1 into a brawl, which was the only shape of fight Harry had ever been allowed to learn. He did not duel. Dueling was for people who expected fairness. He fought the way the cornered fight, fast and dirty and entirely without theater, and for 11 seconds on the darkening pitch he was magnificent, and Wednesday was not there to see it, and she would hate that for a long time. 11 seconds, 3 attackers left. He put the second one down with a stunner that cracked the boy's head against the base of the stands. He turned for the third. And Bram Selwyn, who was not clever but was not stupid either, had done the one thing the others had not, had hung back, had waited, had let Harry burn his attention on the front rank exactly the way Mercer had taught a room full of children leverage means letting the target look at the wrong threat. The 4th attacker hit Harry from behind with the binding hex while Selwyn hit him from the front, and the 2 curses met in the middle of him, and even difficult to kill has a frequency at which it fails, and Harry Potter went down on the cold grass of the Quidditch pitch with his magic locked behind a binding tune to hold a conduit, and the last thing he did before the dark took him was raise 2 fingers of his free hand and snap them, hard, a signal, a summons. The one piece of insurance he and Wednesday had built into the alliance 3 days before and never spoken of since. 200 yards away, beneath the lake, a hand that had been resting against Wednesday Addams' wrist went suddenly rigid. She was on her feet before Thing finished the signal. She did not ask what was wrong. The Alliance had a clause, and the clause was being invoked, and the only fact that mattered was direction. And Thing pointed west toward the pitch, toward the dark, and Wednesday Addams went out of the Slytherin common room at a dead run with the cold rising off her like steam off a winter river. And the portraits she passed would say afterward that they had never seen a student move like that, low and fast and silent, more wolf than girl, and that the temperature had dropped 10 degrees in her wake. She was too late to stop it. She would always be too late to stop it. That was the geometry of the thing, 200 yards and a castle between them. But she was not too late to answer it. She came out onto the pitch into the blue last light and read the scene in a single sweep, the way Harry read rooms, the way they had each learned to read the world, because the world had never once given either of them the courtesy of a warning. 2 boys down and out near a crater of torn turf. A third sagging against the stands, conscious, bleeding. And in the center of it, 2 figures crouched over a fourth who lay unmoving on the grass, Bram Selwyn and one other, lifting Harry Potter between them, dragging him toward the dark mouth of the equipment shed, toward whatever door waited on the other side of it. Selwyn looked up and saw her, and his face in the blue light did a thing that Wednesday would keep afterward in the quiet museum where she stored the moments that justified her. It understood. In the half-second before she reached them, Bram Selwyn understood exactly what he had done and exactly what was coming for it, and the understanding arrived too late to be of any use to him, which was, Wednesday believed, the only honest form justice ever took. Drop him, she said. They dropped him. Not in surrender, they dropped Harry to free their wands, and the boy beside Selwyn got his up first, a curse already on his lips, and Wednesday did not bother with a shield. She had decided, somewhere in the 200 yards, that she was not going to defend. Defense was for people who intended to walk away and let the matter rest. Wednesday Addams did not intend to let the matter rest. She intended to make of these 4 boys a sentence that the rest of the castle would have to finish in its nightmares for years, and you cannot write that kind of sentence from behind a shield. The fire came up out of the cold. That was the thing no one ever expected from her, the contradiction at the center of her magic that the Auspex circle, for all its scrying, had failed to price, that the cold she carried and the fire she carried were the same thing. Her family did not make fire the way other wizards made fire, with heat and combustion and the cheerful chemistry of flame. The Addamses made fire the way the grave makes cold, by taking something away. She reached into the boy with the raised wand and she took the warmth out of him. All of it, every degree, the way her aunt had taught her in the cellar with the cooling bodies, and the warmth had to go somewhere, and she sent it out of him and into the air in front of him as flame, so that the boy froze and burned in the same instant, his own stolen heat turned against him in a column of fire the color of a wound. He screamed. The fire took his wand arm to the elbow before he dropped and rolled, and the rolling saved his life, and Wednesday let it, because she had already moved past him to the one who mattered. Bram Selwyn ran. He made it 4 steps. Wednesday did not chase him. Chasing was undignified, and she had stopped needing to chase things when she was 11. She simply closed her cold fist in the air, and the heat went out of the ground in a line between her and the fleeing boy, frost cracking across the grass faster than he could run, and where the cold passed the air above it ignited, a low wall of blue-white flame springing up across his path, and Bram Selwyn skidded and turned and found her walking toward him through the dusk with fire standing up out of the frozen grass on either side of her like an honor guard, and her black eyes utterly without weather. And thing flowing down her sleeve into her waiting hand. You put your hands on what is mine, Wednesday said. It wasn't Addams, listen, it wasn't us, it was Yaxley, it was Mercer, they made us, I swear. Selwyn was on his knees now, the fire on 3 sides, his wand fallen somewhere in the dark. Please, please, it was just supposed to be a grab, no one was going to hurt him, they just wanted him at the circle, Wednesday said, under the east wing, on the new moon, I know. I have seen it. She crouched in front of him in the firelight exactly as she had crouched in front of him in the corridor a week before, and she examined his face with the same cold cellar interest, and this time there was something else underneath the cold, banked and total, the sensation that had picked her up out of her chair at breakfast and had now found its true and proper use. I gave you a courtesy, Bram Selwyn, in the corridor. I told you what would happen to the next person who touched what was mine. I told you I was establishing precedent. And you went home to your master and you reported it, and then your master sent you to do this anyway, which means you decided my precedent was worth the risk. She tilted her head. You were wrong. I am going to show you how wrong, and I am going to do it slowly enough that the boy you tried to drag into the dark will wake to find the lesson already taught. Wednesday. The voice was hoarse, and it came from the grass behind her, and it stopped her with a completeness that nothing else in the world could have. Harry Potter had not woken to find the lesson taught. He had woken in the middle of it, the binding hex fraying as the boy who had cast it lay stunned, and he had pushed himself up onto one elbow on the cold grass, and he was looking at her across the firelit pitch, at the wall of flame, at the boy burned to the elbow moaning in the dark, at her crouched over Selwyn with the cold pouring off her and the fire standing up out of the frozen ground, and his face was not horror, and it was not gratitude, and it was not the cold fury from the great hall. It was recognition, and underneath the recognition, something steadier, something that reached across the fire and took hold of her by a part of herself she had not known was reachable. "Don't," Harry said, "not like this, not because of me. He would have given you to them." Her voice did not change, the fire did not lower. "He would have handed you to the circle and the knife and the man with the oil-warm voice, and he knew it, and he did it anyway. There is a word for what is owed in return, and I have spent my whole life learning to spell it." "I know." Harry got a knee under himself, then a foot, and he stood, swaying, the binding burns livid on his wrists, and he crossed the firelit grass to her, and he did not flinch from the cold or the flame, which was its own kind of statement. "I know what he is. I'm not asking you to forgive him. I'm not even asking you to let him go." He stopped beside her, looking down at Bram Selwyn, who was weeping now openly, the way the cruel weep when they finally meet something crueler. "I'm asking you to remember our deal. Equals. You don't decide what I can handle, and I don't decide what you can. But this isn't you deciding for me. This is you doing for me a thing I'd have to live inside afterward, and you'd be doing it angry, which is the one time you told me you make mistakes." He looked at her. "Don't kill him angry, Wednesday. If you're going to do it cold later, when you've decided it's worth what it costs you. Not here, not bleeding for me on a pitch where 400 people are going to ask what happened." The fire stood between them and the dark. Wednesday Addams looked at the boy beside her, the boy she had crossed an ocean of loneliness to find, the boy who had been dragged toward a ritual circle 11 minutes ago and was now standing on a broken pitch asking her not to be merciful but to be precise, and she understood that he had just done the single most dangerous thing anyone had ever done to her, which was to be right about her in a way that made her better instead of smaller. She let the fire down, not all of it. She left enough. She turned back to Bram Selwyn, kneeling in the cooling grass, and she reached out one cold finger and laid it against his cheek, beneath his eye, and where she touched him a single white flower of frostburn bloomed and held, a mark, a brand, painless and permanent, a scar in the shape of her attention that he would carry on his face for the rest of his life. "You will not die tonight," she told him. "My equal has asked it, and his asking is the only law I recognize in this castle. But you will wear this, and every person who sees it will know what it means, because I am going to tell them, and the telling will be worse for you than any fire." She rose. "Run back to your master. Tell Cassius Yaxley that I have marked his hand. Tell Aldous Mercer that I have seen his circle and his knife and his new moon, and that I am coming on my own schedule, which I have not shared with him. And tell them both," and here her voice dropped, and Harry Potter, standing beside her, felt the cold of it go through him like a blade, "that the next one of their hands that touches what is mine, I will not be talked down from. The boy who burned tonight kept his life because he was a stranger to me. You keep yours because Harry Potter is merciful in a way I am not. There is no third reason left. You have spent them all." Bram Selwyn ran. He ran into the dark with the white flower burning cold on his cheek, and the boy with the ruined arm crawled after him, and the two stunned ones lay where they had fallen until the professors came, and Wednesday Addams stood on the Quidditch pitch in the blue last light with the fire dying around her ankles and turned to the boy she had run 200 yards through a castle to reach. "You're hurt," she said. It was not a question. It was the closest she came to the thing she actually felt. "I've been worse," Harry said. He was looking at her, at the cold still rising faintly off her shoulders, at the place on the grass where the flowers of fire had stood, at the whole terrible competence of what she was. "You came. Things signaled and you came across the whole castle in under 3 minutes. Nobody's ever—" He stopped. Started again, in the dry, flat voice she had learned meant he was telling the truth and finding it difficult. "I've had people save me before. Out of duty or destiny, or because I was useful to keep alive. I've never had anyone come like that, like the distance was an insult." "It was an insult," Wednesday said. "I intend to take it up with the architect." And Harry Potter laughed, that startled, rough, disbelieving laugh, bleeding on a broken pitch with the dark coming down, and Wednesday Addams felt the cold thing behind her sternum crack open a 3rd degree, and this time she did not seal it back because there was no longer any point pretending the door was shut. The professors came, as they always came, after the danger had passed. McGonagall first, robes streaming, wand up, and Snape a half-step behind her with his black eyes already moving across the scene and arriving, Wednesday saw, at the correct conclusions far faster than his colleague. And behind them both, unhurried, arriving last because he had wanted to see how it ended before he interfered, Aldous Mercer. "What happened here?" McGonagall demanded. 4 students attempted to abduct Harry Potter from the Quidditch pitch," Wednesday said before Harry could speak, because she had decided in the last 30 seconds exactly which version of the truth would do the most damage to the right people. "They used a binding hex tuned to hold a conduit. Professor Snape will recognize the frequency from the burns on his wrists, and will know, as I do, that it is not a hex a 5th year invents on his own. They were dragging him toward the equipment shed when I arrived. I stopped them. One was burned, the others fled. Their names are Bram Selwyn and 3 others I will identify for you in writing." She held McGonagall's eyes. You will want to ask who taught 4/5 years of conduit binding and who profits from Harry Potter being dragged into the dark, and you will not get an honest answer from anyone you ask, because the person who knows is standing behind you wearing an expression of concern. The pitch went very quiet. Aldous Mercer's expression of concern did not flicker. That is a serious accusation, Miss Addams, he said, warm as oil, and a strange one leveled at a teacher by a student who has, by her own account, just set a classmate on fire. I have, Wednesday agreed. He was abducting my ally. I would do it again more thoroughly, and I have informed him of as much. She did not look away from Mercer. You taught a lesson on leverage last Monday, Professor. You said a fight is decided by the person who understands what the target values and arranges for it to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. I was paying attention. I am always paying attention. That is the difference between us. You build your traps assuming no one is watching you build them, and I have been watching you build this one since my first night under this lake. Miss Addams, McGonagall's voice was sharp. That is enough. You will both come to the hospital wing and then to the headmaster's office, and we will determine, Snape interrupted in his driest register, his black eyes on the burns on Harry's wrists and then briefly, unreadably on Wednesday, that Miss Addams is correct about the hex at minimum. This is conduit binding. 5th years do not cast conduit binding. Someone supplied it. He looked at Mercer, and the look held a question that was not friendly, and Wednesday revised her estimate of Severus Snape upward by a full grade. The headmaster will want a full account from everyone present, including the staff. They took Harry to the hospital wing. They took Wednesday to the headmaster's office. And the next morning, the whole castle knew that the Addams girl had burned a boy alive on the Quidditch pitch to keep her hands on Harry Potter, and the version they told, as she had promised herself it would be, was worse than the truth, and it did her work for her. The boy with the ruined arm did not return to classes. The official account said he had been moved to St. Mungo's for treatment, and then, when his family withdrew him, transferred to a school abroad. Wednesday did not believe the account, and neither did Harry, and 3 weeks later, when she finally found the time and the cold decision the boy had earned, she would learn that he had never reached St. Mungo's at all, that Aldous Mercer had collected his own burned, failed instrument before the healers could question him, and that the boy had simply quietly ceased. A conspirator who has failed and been seen is a loose end, and Mercer did not keep loose ends, he kept secrets. The first death of the war was not Wednesday's at all. It was Mercer's, tidying up, and the lesson she took from it was the coldest of the year, that the man she was hunting was willing to spend his own people to keep his schedule, and that a man who spends his own people will not hesitate for an instant over hers. But that was 3 weeks away. On the night of the pitch in the headmaster's office, Albus Dumbledore looked at Wednesday Addams across his desk of whirring instruments, and the twinkle was entirely gone from his eyes, and he said, "You set a child on fire tonight, Miss Addams." "I set an abductor on fire," Wednesday said. "He recovered the use of 3 of his limbs. I consider that restraint, and I exercised it at Harry Potter's request, not yours and not my own. Had it been my decision, the matter would be closed, and you would be having a different and much shorter conversation with his family. I do not doubt it." Dumbledore folded his long hands. "I have known a great many dangerous people, Miss Addams. I am sorry to say, been one. So I will tell you the thing I learned too late and at too great a cost, in the hope that you have time to learn it earlier and cheaper." He looked at her, old and cold and entirely without theater. "The line between protecting what you love and destroying everything around it is not a wall. It is a slope, and it is very slippery, and it is very gentle, and you do not feel yourself sliding until you are already at the bottom, standing in the wreckage, wondering how the people you were trying to save came to be among the dead." He paused. "You burned a boy tonight, and you did it for love, and you will tell yourself for the rest of your life that the two facts are unrelated. I am asking you to notice that they are not." Wednesday Addams looked at the old man for a long time. "You assume I am sliding," she said finally. "I am not. I chose the slope deliberately, with my eyes open, and I will choose every inch of it the same way, and when I reach the bottom, if I reach the bottom, there will be no wreckage that I did not select in advance and consider a fair price." She rose. "You are warning me against becoming a monster, headmaster. It is a kind warning, and I will keep it, because you meant it well. But you have made an error common to good men, which is to assume that I am in danger of becoming something I am not already." She walked to the door. "I am not on the slope, I am the slope. The only question that has ever mattered is who I let stand at the top of it. And I have, for the first time in my life, chosen someone, and he asked me tonight to spare a boy I had every right to kill, and I spared him. That is the leash, headmaster. He is the leash. Pray that nothing in this castle ever cuts it, because you will not enjoy what I am when there is no longer a hand on the other end." She left. And Albus Dumbledore sat alone in his office of glowing instruments, watching the silver device that measured the gathering of certain energies, and he understood, too late as good men always understand things, that he had spent the entire conversation warning the wrong child about the wrong danger, that the threat to the castle had never been Wednesday Addams becoming a monster, but Aldous Mercer learning, as he had just learned, exactly where to cut. Ron and Hermione came to the hospital wing the next morning, and they came angry, and the anger was the kind that only ever grows in the soil of fear. "You're working with her." Ron Weasley said it like an accusation, which it was. He stood at the foot of Harry's bed with his ears going red, Hermione beside him with her arms folded and her jaw set, and the two of them looked at their friend's bandaged wrists and then at each other and then back, and Harry understood that they had rehearsed this on the way up and that it was going to come out wrong no matter how they'd planned it. The Addams girl, the one who set Selwyn on fire, half the school saw what's left of his face. "And you're what, your partners now? She stood up at breakfast and claimed you in front of everyone and you didn't deny it, and now there's a thing between you and you didn't tell us, Harry. You didn't say a word." "I didn't say a word because I knew it would sound like this," Harry said. "Because it's mad." Ron's voice cracked. "She's dangerous, mate, genuinely. Not exciting dangerous, not the kind of trouble we usually actually dangerous. You should have seen the Slytherins talking about her. They're scared of her and they're Slytherins, they're scared of nothing. And you've gone and tied yourself to her, and now 4 blokes tried to grab you off a pitch and she burned them, and where does it end? When does it stop being her protecting you and start being you in the middle of whatever she is?" Hermione had not spoken yet. That was the dangerous one, Harry knew. Ron shouted and was done, but Hermione thought, and what she'd thought was usually worse to hear because it was usually right. She looked at him now with her clever, furious eyes and said quietly, "She terrifies me, Harry, and I've read about people like her. There's a whole literature on possessive magic, on bonds that start as protection and end as something the protected person can't get out of. And I keep thinking you've spent your whole life with people deciding things about you, and now here's one more, except this one's lethal, and you're not running from her. You're choosing her. And I want to understand why, because either you've lost your judgment, or you've seen something in her the rest of us can't, and I don't know which scares me more." Harry was quiet for a moment. He owed them the truth. They'd earned it 100 times over in chambers and graveyards in every bad year, so he gave it to them. "You're both right that she's dangerous," he said. "You're right that she's lethal and possessive, and that the bond could go bad. I'm not going to tell you you're imagining it. But here's the thing neither of you has, because you've never been the thing people collect." He looked at them, dry and flat and honest. "Every single person who's ever wanted me close has wanted me smaller for it. The Ministry wanted a symbol. Dumbledore wanted a weapon he could aim kindly. Even you two, at the start, you wanted the boy who lived, the famous one, and it took years before you wanted me instead of him, and I love you for getting there, I do." Wednesday got there in a corridor on her 3rd day. She looked at me and she didn't want the symbol and she didn't want me smaller. She wanted me exactly the size I am, and she told me no when I expected her to want to own me, and she's the first person in my life who handed me something without trying to make me less to carry it. He met Hermione's eyes. "You asked why I'm choosing her. That's why, not because she's safe. Because she's the only person who's ever looked at the whole of what I am and decided that was the point, not the problem." The hospital wing was quiet. Ron's ears slowly went back to their normal color. Hermione unfolded her arms, though her jaw stayed set. "I still don't trust her," she said. "I'm not asking you to," Harry said. "I'm asking you to trust me. And to watch my back the way you always have, because there's something coming, and when it does I'm going to need everyone I love in one place, and that includes you too, and it includes her, and you're all going to have to be in the same room eventually, and I'd rather it not be a battlefield." He almost smiled. "Start small, don't hex her. She'll respect that more than you'd think. She respects almost nothing, so the bar's low." It was not a reconciliation. But Ron snorted despite himself, and Hermione's mouth did something reluctant, and the 3 of them sat together for a while in the ordinary morning light, and it was enough for now, for the war that was coming, for the friends Mercer was even then deciding which of them to turn. Harry was awake when she came to the hospital wing, against the rules, after curfew, the wards parting for her as they always did. The ward was dark and smelled of antiseptic, and the cold lake air through the cracked window she suspected he had opened on purpose, for her, which was a thought she examined once and then let stand. He was sitting up, his wrists bandaged, the lamplight catching the scar at his hairline, and he watched her cross the empty ward and pull a chair to his bedside and sit, and neither of them spoke for a while, which was its own kind of conversation. "You told Dumbledore you're the Slope," Harry said eventually. "The castle had no secrets from a boy who had spent 6 years learning its walls. Portraits talk." "I did, and that I'm the leash. You are." She looked at him in the lamplight. "Does it offend you, the framing? You have been clear about framings." Harry was quiet for a moment. "A week ago it would have," he said. "A week ago I'd have heard leash and thought collar and walked out, but I watched you on that pitch tonight, Wednesday. I watched you have every right and every power and every reason to kill a boy who just tried to feed me to a ritual, and I watched you stop because I asked you to, not because you agreed, because I asked." He met her eyes. "That's not a leash. A leash is something they put on you. You handed me the other end yourself. There's a word for that, and it isn't collar." "What is the word?" "Trust," Harry said. "You trust me with the one thing you've never trusted anyone with, which is the authority to make you less than your worst instinct." He held her gaze, and the dry flatness was gone from his voice now, and what was underneath it was the rarest thing he owned. "I've spent my life being handed things I didn't want: fame, prophecy, expectation. You just handed me the only thing anyone's ever offered me that I'd actually choose to carry. So no, it doesn't offend me. It's the first responsibility I've ever been given instead of sentenced to." Amp burned low between them. Outside, the lake pressed its dark face to the cracked window, and the cold came in, and neither of them moved to close it. "They're going to come again," Harry said. "Mercer spent 4 bodies tonight to learn one thing that I'm hard to grab in the open. He won't make that mistake twice. Next time it'll be quiet and clever, and it'll come from a direction I trust." His jaw tightened. "From a friend, probably. That's how men like him work. They don't break the door. They turn the person who holds the key." Wednesday Addams thought of the knife in the vision, the kitchen blade, ordinary and wrong, the young hand that held it, the wounded surprise on the bound boy's face. She thought of telling him, and she found again that she could not yet, not until she knew the face, because to hand him an unnamed betrayal was to make him suspect everyone he loved, and that, she understood now, sitting in the cold lamplight beside a boy who had just called her trust by its name, was the one cruelty she was no longer willing to commit. "Yes," she said instead, "from a friend. You should watch the ones you trust, Harry, not because they are guilty. Because the man hunting you has already decided to make one of them so." "I know." He lay back against the pillows, tired, the burns livid on his wrists. "I've been watching them all week. Ron, Hermione, the team, Tobias." He shook his head. "I hate it, watching the people who die for me looking for the one Mercer's going to turn. It's the cruelest thing he's done yet, and he hasn't even done it. He's just made me start." Wednesday went very still. "Tobias," she said, acridly. "Gryffindor our year, decent bloke, but quiet lately. His little sister's been ill. He's been worried sick, barely sleeps." Harry's eyes were already closing, the exhaustion of the binding hex pulling him down. "Why?" "No reason," Wednesday lied, the first lie she had told him, and she hated the taste of it, and she told it anyway, because she had just heard the name that went with the knife, and she needed, before she handed Harry Potter a betrayal, to be absolutely certain, and because a quiet boy with a sick sister and a worried, sleepless face was exactly the kind of key a man like Mercer would know how to turn. She sat with him until he slept. Then she rose, and she closed the window against the cold at last for him, and she went out into the dark castle that now feared her, and she began on her own cold schedule the hunt. It began with Thing. She sent the hand ahead of her through the sleeping castle with a single instruction, pressed into its knuckles in the silent grammar the two of them shared: "Find the Gryffindor named Tobias Ackerley, and watch and touch nothing and learn." Thing was the finest scout she had ever possessed, better than any owl or familiar, because Thing could go where a girl could not, under doors, along rafters, into the gaps in a confession where the truth hid, and it could read a sleeping face for the residue of fear, the way she read a corridor for the residue of death. She did not sleep that night. She sat in the cold common room with the green lake light moving on the walls and waited, and near dawn Thing returned, climbing the leg of her chair, and it pressed 3 things against her palm in sequence, 3 facts gathered from a dormitory in a desk drawer and the underside of a worried boy's pillow. The first, Tobias Ackerley had not slept that night either. He had lain awake with his eyes open and his jaw clenched, and his hands had shaken, and a person's hands shook like that for 2 reasons only: illness or guilt, and Thing had checked his temperature with a finger against his wrist and found him cold and well. The second, in the drawer of his desk, beneath a stack of unsent letters to a hospital in London where his 9-year-old sister lay dying of a wasting curse the healers could not name, there was a single sheet of expensive parchment, unsigned, in a hand Wednesday did not yet recognize but would, that promised in careful, deniable language that the sister's curse could be lifted, that there existed a person who could lift it, and that the price was small and would be named when the time came, and would require only that Tobias be in a certain place on a certain night and open a certain door. The third was the worst, and Thing pressed it against her palm last and slowly, because even a disembodied hand understood the weight of it. Beneath the parchment, wrapped in a handkerchief, Tobias Ackerley had hidden a knife, an ordinary knife. A kitchen blade, the kind a boy might take from any kitchen, mundane and wrong, exactly as she had seen it in the dark of her vision 3 nights before, and the boy had not used it, had not even unwrapped it, had only hidden it where he could find it, the way a drowning man hides the rope he has not yet decided to hang himself with. Wednesday Addams sat in the cold green light with the dawn coming up over the lake, and she understood the whole shape of it at last, and the understanding was worse than the vision had been, because the vision had shown her a traitor and the facts had shown her a brother. Mercer had not chosen a villain. A villain would have been easy, a villain she could have burned without a second thought and slept the better for it. Mercer had chosen a good boy with a dying sister, and a price he could almost convince himself was fair, and he had done it precisely because a betrayal that comes from love cuts deeper than one that comes from greed, and because Wednesday Addams, who would burn the world to keep Harry Potter from the wounded surprise she had seen on his face, would have to hesitate, over a boy whose only crime was loving someone the way she now loved someone, and trying to save them the way she would try to save him. It was, she thought in the cold dawn, a genuinely excellent trap. She would have to tell Aldous Mercer so before she killed him. She wrapped the 3 facts in the locked room behind her sternum, beside the knife and the vision and the wounded surprise, and she did not go to Harry because she did not yet know what she would do, and Harry would want to save the boy, and she did not yet know whether the boy could be saved, and an equal does not bring a problem to the other half of the alliance until they have decided whether it is a problem or a grave. The castle feared her now. Good, let it fear her. She had a brother to weigh against a brother, a friend to weigh against a friend, and a man with an oil-warm voice who had found the one kind of knife she did not know how to take away from a person, the kind they sharpen themselves out of love in the dark for someone they cannot bear to lose. She would learn, she always learned, but for the first time since the carriage, Wednesday Addams was not certain she would learn in time. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4, 2 predators in the 3 weeks after the pitch. The castle learned a new arithmetic, and the arithmetic was this, that there were now 2 of them, and that 2 of them was not twice as dangerous as one, but something the school had no number for. They did not announce it. They did not need to. They simply began to be seen together, in the restricted section after hours, on the cold walk along the lake at dawn, at the edges of the same crowds, never touching, never warm, 2 dark figures who arrived at conclusions other people had not finished forming. Harry took his meals at the Gryffindor table and Wednesday at the Slytherin, and the 400 students between them understood, without a word being spoken, that the 2 tables were now connected by a wire pulled taut, and that anyone foolish enough to pluck it would learn what was strung on the other end. They were hunting. That was the truth beneath the rumor. Every hour they were not in class, they spent taking the Auspex circle apart from the outside, and they did it the way they did everything, as a matched pair, his patience and her menace, his questions and her silences, until the circle's careful architecture of secrecy began under the steady pressure of 2 minds that did not stop to show its joints. "It's a pyramid," Harry said one evening in the stacks, laying it out on a sheet of parchment between them like a battle map. Mercer at the top. Yaxley running the student body, recruitment, discipline, the public face. Below Yaxley, an inner ring, maybe 6 or 8, the ones who actually know what the circle is for, and below them 40 or 50 hangers on who think it's a dueling society with good wine and better connections, and who have no idea they're standing on top of a ritual. He tapped the lowest tier. That's our way in, the hangers-on. Half of them are scared and all of them are ambitious, and a scared, ambitious person who's just realized he's joined something darker than he bargained for is the easiest thing in the world to turn. "You have one in mind," Wednesday said. It was not a question. She had been watching him work for 3 weeks and had learned the particular stillness that meant he had already chosen a piece and was deciding when to move it. Aldrich Pusey. 4th-year Ravenclaw joined the circle in the autumn because Yaxley promised him a dueling apprenticeship and a route into the ministry. Clever, anxious, in over his head. 3 days ago he watched the inner ring do something in a back room he wasn't meant to see, and he's been sick ever since can't eat jumps at shadows. Harry's eyes were flat and certain. He wants out and he's too frightened to ask. We're going to give him a door, and in exchange, protection from us. Which after the pitch is the most valuable currency in this castle. The corner of his mouth moved. "You made us into something people would sell their own society to stand behind. I'm just spending it." Wednesday looked at him across the parchment in the cold light of the stacks and felt the thing she had stopped pretending not to feel, the deep, still satisfaction of watching an equal work, which was the only pleasure she had ever found that did not come with a corpse attached. "You are enjoying this," she observed. "I've spent 6 years being the thing other people maneuver around the board," Harry said. "Turns out it's a lot more fun to be the one moving the pieces." He rolled the parchment. "Pusey, tomorrow you frighten him, I save him. We've done it twice already this week. We're getting good at it." They had, and they were. It had become their shape, Wednesday the cold and Harry the warmth, not because the roles were true, but because they were useful. A good cruel theater the 2 of them ran on the castle's frightened and ambitious, in which she would corner a wavering circle hanger-on in some unwatched corridor and let the temperature drop and the rumor of the pitch do its work. And just as the boy reached the edge of panic, Harry would arrive, reasonable, sympathetic, a hand on the shoulder, and a quiet offer of a way out. And the boy would fall into the door they had built for him, grateful to the bone. It was leverage. Mercer had taught it. They had simply learned it better than his own prefect. But there was a thing Wednesday was not telling him, and it sat in the stacks with them every evening in the locked room behind her sternum, beside the knife and the vision and the wounded surprise. She knew the name that went with the kitchen blade. She had known it for 3 weeks. And every evening that Harry laid out his battle map and did not draw Tobias Ackerley onto it, she made the same cold decision she had made the first night, to wait, to be certain, to learn whether the boy was a problem or a grave. And every evening the decision cost her a little more, because the alliance had a clause, equals, no managing, no protecting, no deciding what he could handle, and she was, she knew, violating the spirit of it with her silence even as she kept its letter. She told herself she was protecting the friendship, not the friend. She told herself that to hand Harry a betrayal before she could offer him a solution was to give him only the wound. All of it was true. None of it changed the fact that she was, for the first time, keeping something from the one person she had sworn never to lie to, and that the keeping had a flavor she did not enjoy, and that the flavor was guilt, an emotion she had not experienced since she was 9 and had assumed, like most childhood ailments, that she had outgrown. "You've gone somewhere," Harry said. She came back. He was watching her across the parchment, the green eyes too sharp to be deceived by much, and she understood that the cost of the silence was about to come due, and that she was not yet ready to pay it. "I was considering Pusey's weaknesses," she lied and hated it, and saw in the flicker behind his eyes that he did not entirely believe her, and chose, for reasons of his own, not to press. That was the alliance, too. The trust ran both ways, and he was trusting her now with the one thing she least deserved to be trusted with, which was the benefit of the doubt. Aldrich Pusey turned in under 4 minutes, which Harry said afterward was a personal best. They took him in the 4th-floor corridor that the staircases stranded twice a week, where a quirk of the moving stairs left a stretch of stone cut off from the rest of the castle for 11 minutes at a time. Harry had memorized the schedule. Wednesday had memorized the boy. He came around the corner with his bag over his shoulder and his face already gray from a week of bad sleep, and the staircase swung away behind him with a grinding finality, and he was alone in the cold with the Addams girl standing very still at the far end of the corridor, and the temperature began gently to fall. "You've been sick," Wednesday said. She did not move toward him. He did not need to. The cold did the moving for her, sliding down the corridor ahead of her voice. "Since Tuesday you can't eat, you jump at doors. You saw something in a back room of the Auspex Circle that you were not meant to see, and you have not slept properly since, and you have begun to understand that the society you joined for a ministry apprenticeship is not a dueling club at all." Pusey's wand came halfway up. "Stay back, I know who you are. You'll what?" It was not a threat. It was a question asked with genuine cold curiosity, and that was worse. "You saw the pitch, Aldrich, or you heard the true version of it, not the one the school tells. You know what I did to 4 boys who put their hands on what is mine. You are 4th year with a trembling wand and a guilty conscience, and I am the thing your whole society is frightened of, and we both know exactly how this corridor ends if I decide it ends that way." She tilted her head. "But I have not decided that. That is the part you have not understood yet. I did not strand you here to hurt you. I stranded you here because in 9 minutes the staircase comes back, and I wanted to give you a choice before it does." The wand shook. "What choice?" That was when Harry stepped out of the alcove behind the boy, where he had been the entire time, quiet, unhurried, and put a hand on Pusey's shoulder, warm, steadying, the only kindness in the cold corridor, and Pusey flinched and turned and found the boy who lived looking at him with something that was almost gentle. "The choice is a door, Aldrich," Harry said. "You're in something you can't get out of on your own. The inner ring doesn't let people leave. You've worked that out, which is why you're so frightened. If you go to a professor, they won't believe you, because the professor running the circle is the one you'd be reporting. If you do nothing, the convocation comes and you find out exactly what you joined from the inside with no way back." His hand stayed on the boy's shoulder. "Or you tell us what you saw right now, and in exchange you stand behind the 2 people in this castle that even Mercer's society won't touch. We protect our sources, Aldrich. We've done it twice this week. Nobody who's talked to us has been so much as bruised. That's a promise, and after the pitch, you know it's one we can keep." Pusey looked between them, the cold girl who had stranded him and the warm boy who was saving him, and he did not understand that they were a single instrument played in 2 registers, and the not understanding was the whole point, and he broke, the way the frightened and ambitious always broke, gratefully, into the door they had built for him. He told them what they needed, white-faced, with Wednesday between him and the now-returning stare and Harry beside him offering the only kindness in the room. The circle was preparing for something, a convocation, the inner ring called it, the largest working in the society's history, scheduled for a night Pusey did not know, but that the inner ring spoke of in hushed and reverent terms. Mercer had told the inner circle it would anchor the society's power for a generation. Yaxley had been arguing with Mercer about the timeline. Pusey had heard them, through a door raised voices, Yaxley saying it was too soon, that they didn't have the boy yet, that you couldn't anchor a working on a vessel you hadn't secured, and Mercer saying in that warm and terrible voice that the vessel would secure itself, that he had arranged a key, that Yaxley should attend to recruitment and leave the unlocking to him. "A key," Harry said very quietly, when Pusey had been sent away under their protection. "He told Yaxley he'd arranged a key, someone who'll open a door he doesn't have to break." Wednesday said nothing. The key had a name and a dying sister and a kitchen blade in a drawer, and she sat in the cold classroom and did not say it, and felt the locked room behind her sternum grow heavier by one more secret she was choosing, against her own oath, to carry alone. "A friend," Harry went on, working it through aloud, not looking at her, looking at the middle distance where he did his best thinking. "It has to be a friend. Mercer learned on the pitch that he can't take me in the open, so he's not going to. He's going to have someone I trust walk me somewhere or open something or vouch for something on a night I'm not expecting it. Someone close enough that I won't read the trap until the door's already shut." His jaw tightened. "I've been watching them for weeks. Ron would die first. Hermione would burn the castle down before she let anyone use her against me. The team," he stopped. Tobias has been off, distracted, disappearing. His sister's worse, he barely talks anymore. But he wouldn't, and here, for the first time since she had known him, Harry Potter could not finish a deduction because the deduction led somewhere he was not willing to follow, and the unwillingness was the most human thing she had ever seen him do. You do not want it to be a friend, Wednesday said, carefully, truthfully, as close to the edge of her secret as she could walk without falling off it. No, Harry said, I don't. That's the trap, isn't it? Mercer didn't just find a key. He found the one key I'd refused to suspect until it was too late, because suspecting it means admitting that the people I'd die for can be turned, and I've spent my whole life telling myself they can't, because if they can, his voice went flat and cold in the way she had learned meant the truth was costing him. If they can, then I'm exactly as alone as the Dursleys always told me I was. And I'd rather walk into his circle than believe that. The cold classroom was silent. And Wednesday Addams sat with the name in her mouth and the truth on her tongue and the perfect, terrible opening to say it. To say, it is Tobias, I have seen the knife, I have read the letter, I have known for 3 weeks, and she did not say it, and the not saying was no longer about being certain, because she was certain. It was about the look on his face when he said I'd rather walk into his circle than believe that, and the knowledge, cold and total, that the moment she named the friend, she would take from him the last thing the world had left him that the world had not already spent. You are not alone, she said instead. It was the truest thing she could offer that was not the truth she was hiding. Whatever else is true in this castle, whoever else can be turned, there is one person in it who cannot, because I have nothing left to turn me with, no sister, no price, no door I would open for any power on earth. They found a key to a friend, Harry. They will not find one to me because I am not a lock. I am the thing that waits on the other side of the door for whoever opens it. She held his eyes. You wanted to know on the pitch why I came. That is why, not destiny, not duty. I came because there is exactly one door in this world I will always be standing behind, and it is yours, and Aldous Mercer has not begun to understand what that means. Harry looked at her for a long moment. And then he did a thing that neither of them had done in the 3 weeks of the alliance, a thing that violated the cold theater they ran on the castle and the careful distance they kept even from each other. He reached across the parchment and put his hand over hers, warm over cold, the way he had in the restricted section the night they made the deal, except that this time there was no deal being closed, nothing being signed. Only one person reaching for another in a cold room because the dark was coming and he had found, against every expectation of his life, that he no longer had to meet it alone. I know, he said. That's the part Mercer got wrong. He thinks he's hunting a boy with friends he can turn. The green eyes held hers, steady, unafraid, and underneath the flat tactical calm was the rarest thing he owned, offered freely across a battle map in the cold. He doesn't know he's hunting two of something. And he doesn't know that the second one doesn't have a door at all. Wednesday Addams did not pull her hand away. She let it stay, cold under warm, for exactly as long as he left it there, and she did not file the sensation away or armor against it or examine it for weakness. She simply let it be true in the dark where only he could see it, and she understood, with a clarity that frightened her more than any vision, that she had just been handed the second reason she would never tell him about the knife, not to spare him the wound, but because she could not bear to be the one who put it there. It was, she would think later, the most dangerous mistake of her life. But on that evening in the cold classroom, with his hand over hers, it did not feel like a mistake. It felt like the only warm thing she had ever chosen to keep. They learned what the Auspex Circle actually wanted from a book that the restricted section did not want them to read. It took Harry 3 nights to get past the wards on it, a thin black volume chained to its shelf, untitled, its pages warm to the touch in a way no book should be, and when he finally laid it open between them in the cold lamplight, Wednesday understood within a page that they had been thinking too small about Mercer the entire time. It's not a recruitment manual, she said, reading down the warm vellum. It is a liturgy. The Auspex Circle is not a society that performs a rite. It is a rite that wears a society, the way a hermit crab wears a shell, and the shell is replaced every generation, new students, new names, new dueling club, while the thing inside it goes on unchanged. She turned the page, and the carvings inked on it moved, the way the ones in her vision moved, and a cold went through her that had nothing to do with her own. Harry, this is centuries old. The convocation Pusey heard about anchoring the society's power for a generation, that phrase is in here, and it is not the first time it has been used. There is a list, dates, every 50 years, give or take, going back further than the founders, a working, a vessel, and each time in the margin the same hand has written a single word beside the date. What word? She showed him. The word was fed. Harry was silent for a moment, the lamplight cold on his glasses. Every 50 years someone gets harvested and something writes fed in the margin in the same handwriting across 600 years. He looked up. That's not a society passing down a tradition. That's one thing that's been doing this the whole time, behind a new face every generation. Mercer, Wednesday said, or the thing wearing Mercer. I revised my estimate of him upward every time we met, and I was still revising in the wrong category. I thought I was measuring a clever man who had learned an old rite. I have been measuring the rite itself in its current shell. She closed the warm black book, and her hands were steadier than she felt. This changes the shape of it. You cannot reason with a liturgy. You cannot turn its recruits and starve it the way we have been doing, because the recruits were never the point. They are this generation's shell, and it will simply grow another. Only way to end a thing that has worn 6 centuries of faces is to unmake the thing inside the face. And I do not yet know how one unmakes something that has been feeding since before the castle stood. She looked at the boy across the lamplight, the leashed fire she could see banked under his skin. But I noticed that it has been feeding on one conduit at a time every 50 years, carefully, never more than it could hold. And I noticed that it has never, in 600 years of margins, met 2. You think that's our edge, that it's never had to drink 2 at once? I think, Wednesday said slowly, that a creature which has survived 6 centuries by never taking more than it can hold has spent 6 centuries learning exactly one lesson, and that the lesson is its only weakness, and that we are the first thing it has ever encountered that might make that lesson kill it. She set the black book aside. I do not have the whole of it yet, but I have the shape. And the shape is this: it is not a man we are fighting. It is an appetite, and an appetite, Harry, can be killed by exactly one thing in all the world, by being offered more than it can refuse. Neither of them knew, that cold night in the stacks, how literally the shape would come true. But it went into the plan, the way everything went into the plan, and it was there, weeks later, at the bottom of a black lake, when an appetite older than the founders opened itself one last time to drink. There was one night in those 3 weeks that neither of them ever spoke of afterward, and that Wednesday kept apart from all the others. It was not planned. She had gone up to the astronomy tower past midnight because the dead were loud beneath the lake, and the open air sometimes quieted them, and she had found Harry already there, sitting against the parapet with his back to the stone and his face turned up to a sky scrubbed clean of cloud, the whole cold wheel of the stars burning above the dark highlands. He had not been surprised to see her. She had not been surprised to find him. They had begun, somewhere in the 3 weeks, to occupy the same solitudes, 2 people who had spent their lives being alone, discovering that there was a particular kind of aloneness that improved with company, provided the company demanded nothing. She sat down against the parapet beside him, not touching, and for a long while neither of them spoke, and the silence was the most comfortable thing she had felt since crossing the ocean. "My parents are dead," Harry said eventually. He did not say it heavily. He said it the way he said most true things, flat and dry in inventory. "I never knew them. There's a man who taught the defense post before Mercer, Lupin, who knew them, and sometimes he tells me things, and every time he does I realize I've been carrying around a version of them I invented, because I had to invent something. You can't grow up in a cupboard with literally nothing." He looked at the stars. "I used to think the worst thing was not having them. I've started to think the worst thing is that everyone who did have them keeps handing me pieces of them, and I keep trying to build a mother and a father out of other people's leftovers, and it never holds together because they're not mine, they're someone else's memory of someone I'm supposed to feel I knew." Wednesday considered this. She did not offer comfort. Comfort was a performance, and he would have despised it, and she did not have it to give in any case. She offered the only thing she had, which was the truth. "My family is the opposite of yours," she said. "I have too much of mine. 3 generations under one roof, all of them alive, all of them loud, all of them convinced that the proper way to love a child is to teach her to survive the family. I was raised in a house where affection and danger were the same gesture, where my mother taught me to throw a knife as a love language, and my uncle tried to electrocute me as a kindness, and I learned very young that the safest place in any room was the one with the clearest view of the exits." She looked up at the cold stars. "I am not telling you this because it is sad. It is not sad. I would not trade it. I am telling you so that you understand that I did not arrive at being alone by accident, the way you did. I chose it. I looked at the loud, crowded, loving, lethal house I came from, and I decided that the only person who would never be turned against me, never be used, never be a handle, was no one. I decided that the safe number of people to love was 0. And I held to that decision for 16 years, through 3 continents and a great deal of provocation, and it was the single most rational choice I have ever made. And then a boy in a defense classroom looked at a trap built to be lost and built a different trap instead," Wednesday said, "and I discovered that my single most rational choice had a flaw in it I had never tested, because I had never, in 16 years, met the thing it was designed to keep out." She turned her head and looked at him in the starlight. "You are the flaw, Harry. You are the exception. My entire architecture was never built to survive. I am not telling you this as flattery. I am telling you because you sat on a broken pitch and asked me to weigh my life against yours, and I told you the scale was already set, and you deserve to know how it came to be set, and the answer is that I spent 16 years making myself a fortress with the gate welded shut, and you are simply the one person who turned out to be standing inside it the whole time before I built the walls, so that everything I did to keep the world out, I did with you already in." The wind moved over the tower. The stars burned. Harry Potter was quiet for a long time. "That's the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me," he said finally, and it had the word flaw in it 3 times. "I am aware," Wednesday said. "I told you. I do not know how to want something without it sounding like a structural report. You will have to be patient with the construction." And Harry laughed quietly into the cold, his shoulder an inch from hers and no closer, and they sat against the parapet under the burning wheel of the stars and did not touch and did not need to, 2 fortresses with the same person sealed inside, and it was, Wednesday thought, the warmest she had ever been, and she never spoke of it again, and she never forgot a second of it. The dueling club met on the last Friday of the month, and it was Mercer's instrument, and everyone with eyes could see it. He had revived it within a week of arriving, ostensibly to give the students a healthy outlet, in fact to build himself an arena where he could watch the school fight and quietly mark the ones worth harvesting. The great hall was cleared, the tables banished, a long raised platform conjured down the center, and half the school crowded the walls to watch their classmates duel under the approving eye of the handsome new professor who smiled too well. The Auspex Circle ran it. Yaxley refereed. It was, Harry said, the single most efficient talent scouting operation he had ever seen, and the fact that Mercer had built it in plain sight, applauded by the very faculty he was deceiving, was the most chilling argument for the man's intelligence that Wednesday had yet encountered. They went together. They had not been invited. They did not need to be. Harry walked into the great hall with Wednesday at his side, and the whole room turned, and Yaxley on the platform went still, because the 2 students who had been quietly dismantling his society for 3 weeks had just walked into the heart of it in front of the entire school and the watching professor, and there was no version of the next hour in which the circle came out ahead. "Mr. Potter," Mercer said, warm as oil, from his place at the head of the hall. "Miss Addams, you honor us. We don't often see you at school functions. We heard it was a place to take the measure of people," Harry said pleasantly. "We're always interested in that. Then by all means." Mercer's smile reached exactly as far as his cheekbones. "The platform is open. Perhaps you would each care for a bout, purely for the education of the younger students, of course. There is so much they can learn from watching their betters." It was a trap, and a clumsy one by Mercer's standards, and Wednesday understood why a half-second before Harry murmured it to her. The man wanted them on the platform, exposed, dueling his own hand-picked circle members one at a time, worn down, made to look beatable in front of the school whose fear was their chief weapon. He wanted to take the rumor of the pitch and crack it here in public, where the cracking would be remembered, so they did not duel his circle one at a time. "We'll take the platform," Harry said. "Together, 2 on as many as you like. Pick your best." The hall murmured. Yaxley looked at Mercer. Mercer, after a moment, inclined his head, because to refuse would be to concede that 2 students frightened his whole society, and a man who has built his power on appearing untroubled cannot afford to look troubled in front of 400 witnesses. He sent 6. What followed lasted 90 seconds, and the school talked about it for the rest of the year. Wednesday had fought beside no one in her life. The Addamses were a family of soloists, each a closed and lethal system, and she had expected, walking up onto the platform, to fight beside Harry the way one fights beside a useful tool, with coordination but not communion. She was wrong. The instant the first curses flew, she discovered that fighting beside Harry Potter was not like fighting beside anyone. It was like fighting beside a second version of her own mind, one that occupied the half of the board she could not watch, that moved into the gaps she left without being asked, that read her intentions off the angle of her shoulders and built its own around them, so that the 2 of them on the platform were not 2 duelists but one organism with 4 hands and no blind spots. He was the storm and she was the frost. He fought loud, great cracking reductors, a stunner that threw a 7th-year clean off the platform, the raw, overwhelming power the wizarding world had always half-glimpsed and never understood, magic that came up out of him under pressure like floodwater through a cracked dam, more than a school had any right to hold. And where his storm drove their opponents back, her frost was waiting, the temperature dropping in the corners he herded them into, the cold closing their throats and slowing their wands, the small, precise cruelties that turned a stumble into a fall and a fall into a surrender. He broke their formation, she broke their nerve. He was the question they could not answer, she was the answer they did not survive. It was over in a minute and a half. 6 of the circle's best lay groaning on or beneath the platform, and Harry Potter stood at one end of it, breathing hard with power still crackling off his wand hand in visible threads of light. That was the moment the hall would remember, the moment the leash slipped for just an instant and 400 students saw what was actually on the other end of it, the banked cosmic fire that the cursed scar in the cupboard and 6 years of being told he was ordinary had never managed to put out. And Wednesday Addams stood at the other end, untouched, the cold still pouring off her, and between them the wreckage of Aldous Mercer's pride lay scattered for the whole school to count. Mercer applauded. He did it slowly, deliberately, walking forward through the silence, and the applause was a single clever stroke that turned his defeat into a gift he had chosen to give, and Wednesday revised her estimate of him upward again, because a man who can applaud his own humiliation and make it look like generosity is a man who has never once lost control of a room. Magnificent, he said, truly. I have taught for 20 years and I have never seen two students fight as one mind. Whatever you are to each other, and his eyes moved between them, warm and measuring, pricing the thing that bound them the way a jeweler prices a stone, it has made you formidable. Formidable enough, I think, that the younger students have learned all they can stand to learn tonight. He turned to the hall. That will be all. Thank you, Mr. Potter, Miss Addams. You have given us a great deal to consider. And as the hall emptied buzzing, Wednesday caught the look that passed between Mercer and Yaxley, the prefect furious, the master serene, and she heard with the trained ear of a person who had spent a lifetime listening to conversations she was not meant to hear, the single sentence Mercer murmured to his hand as the students filed out. You see now why I'm not worried about the girl, Mercer said softly. Look at how she fought beside him. Look at how she watched his flank. 3 weeks ago she was a soloist who trusted no one. Now she cannot take her eyes off him. He smiled. She has given me everything I need, Cassius. She has shown the whole school exactly how much she would lose. A weapon that loves is a weapon with a handle, and I am very good with handles. They walked back to the dungeons together in the cold, not touching, the castle quiet around them, and at the door to the Slytherin corridor Harry stopped, and Wednesday stopped, and for a moment neither of them spoke. You heard it, Harry said, what he said to Yaxley about handles. I heard it. He thinks you're his way to me, that if he threatens you, I'll walk into anything to save you, and if he threatens me, you'll burn down anything to save me. He's built his whole endgame on the idea that the thing between us is a weakness he can pull on. Harry looked at her in the cold light. He's not entirely wrong. That's what's keeping me up. He's not entirely wrong, Wednesday. I would walk into his circle to save you. You'd burn the castle to save me. He's identified a real lever. Yes, Wednesday agreed. He has. It is, I admit, an excellent piece of analysis. He has correctly identified that we would each die for the other. She turned to face him fully in the greenlit dark. He has simply made the error that every clever man makes about love, which is to assume it is only a weakness. He sees a handle. He does not see that the handle is attached to something that wants to be picked up, so that it may be closer to his throat. He thinks he can use what binds us to pull us apart, into traps, into circles, into the dark. He has not considered that we might let him pull, that we might walk into his handle willingly together on our own schedule, and arrive in his ritual chamber not as a captured vessel and a grieving weapon, but as the last two things he ever expected to see standing in the one place he believed himself safe. Her black eyes held his. He is going to use our bond to draw us in. Good, let him. It is the only mistake he has made, and it is the one that will finish him, because he has invited the two of us into the heart of his power and convinced himself it is a trap he is setting, when it is in fact a door we have been looking for since the night I dreamed it. Harry Potter looked at her for a long moment in the cold. You've decided we let it happen, he said. Whatever he's planning, we walk into it. I have decided we stop running from a confrontation we cannot avoid and have it on the only terms that favor us, the terms where he believes he is in control. She paused, but not yet, not until we know the shape of the key he's arranged, not until I have seen the rest of the vision. There is a piece I do not have, Harry, and I will not walk us into his chamber until I have it, because the piece I am missing is the one that decides whether we walk out. It was as close as she had come to telling him, the key, the friend, the knife. She stood in the cold with the truth one sentence away and the perfect moment to say it, and she watched him nod, trusting her, granting her the benefit of the doubt she had not earned for 3 weeks running, and she made, one final time, the decision she would come to regret more than any other. Then we find the peace, Harry said, together. Together, Wednesday agreed, and the word was true, and the silence underneath it was a lie, and she carried both of them down into the dark beneath the lake, where the vision was already gathering itself for the night it would finally show her the face above the knife, the face she had known for 3 weeks, and was about to be made at last to name. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5. The vision the dark had been patient with her. It had shown her the circle on her first night, and the knife in her first week, and the hooded ring and the oil-warm voice as the weeks went on, doling out the vision a piece at a time the way a cruel parent doles out a story to a child who has not yet earned the ending. On the night of the new moon's approach, 3 days before it would hang invisible over the highlands, the dark decided she had earned the rest, and it gave her all of it at once, and it nearly killed her. She went under between one breath and the next, asleep in the cold dormitory beneath the lake, and she did not dream her way into the chamber this time. She was simply there, fully, her bare feet on the freezing stone, the tallow and the old blood thick in her throat, and the vision had a completeness it had never had before. She could turn her head, and the carvings on the walls turned to follow her, and she understood that she was not watching a memory of the future but standing inside it, and that the future could see her back. The circle was drawn, the candles guttered in their ring. And in the center knelt the bound figure with the bowed head and the black hair, and this time when she crossed the chamber toward him, the dark did not hide his face. Harry Potter lifted his head, and his eyes were open, and they were not afraid, and that was the worst part, because a frightened captive believes he might be saved, and Harry's eyes held the flat calm of a man who has done the arithmetic, and is waiting only to see whether the sum comes out the way he has predicted. Around him stood the hooded ring, and at its head the tall man whose voice she now knew, speaking the words older than the stone, and the carvings on the walls had begun to glow the color of a wound, and the binding circle was filling with a light that came up through the floor like water through a drowning hold. This was the convocation. This was the working that would anchor the circle's power for a generation, and the anchor was Harry, and the rite was not a murder, which would have been mercy. It was a harvesting. It would not kill him. It would open him the way Mercer had said a vessel must be opened, and pour out of him the leashed cosmic fire the wizarding world had never understood, and bind it into the carved stone of the chamber to feed the circle for 50 years, and leave behind a boy with poison-green eyes and nothing behind them, alive and hollow, a candle the world would go on thanking for having once been a fire. And there, at the edge of the chamber, half in shadow, stood the figure with the knife. The dark let her see his face at last. She had known it for 3 weeks, had read it in a letter in a drawer in a sick boy's sleepless wrists, but knowing a thing and seeing it are different countries, and when Tobias Ackerley's face resolved out of the shadow above the ordinary kitchen blade, Wednesday Addams, who did not flinch, flinched. He was crying. That was the detail the dark had saved for last, the cruelest one, the one that turned the whole vision from a betrayal into a tragedy. Tobias Ackerley stood at the edge of the chamber with the knife in his shaking hand and tears on his face, and he was not there to stab Harry. She understood the knife now, finally, completely. He was there because the rite required the door to be opened by one who loved the vessel, that the betrayal itself was an ingredient, that Mercer's genius had been to make the act of opening the door a wound, and the knife was Tobias's own, the knife he had been hiding in his drawer for weeks. The knife he had not yet decided whether to turn on himself or on his friend or on the man who had done this to him. The knife was the measure of how far gone he was. The knife was a boy choosing, in real time in the dark, whether there was any version of this in which he did not become the thing the letter had purchased. And then the vision did something it had never done before. It split. She stood in the chamber, and the chamber became 2 chambers, overlaid, flickering, 2 endings laid one atop the other like a double exposure. In one the fire came, her fire, the cold-born flame, roaring up through the hooded ring, and Harry breaking the binding from inside as she struck it from without, and the chamber filling with light and screaming and the smell of burning robes, and at the end of it 2 figures standing in the wreckage, bloodied, alive together. In the other the same fire came, and the same breaking, and the same light and screaming, but at the end of it only one figure stood in the wreckage, and she could not tell, however she turned her head, however the carvings turned to follow her, whether the figure left standing was the boy or the girl, only that it was one and not 2, and that whichever it was had its face turned away from her toward something on the ground that it could not stop looking at. She tried to see which. The dark would not let her. It showed her the 2 endings flickering, one atop the other, the saved and the severed, and it whispered the only thing it ever whispered, which was that the future was not yet fixed, that the split was real, that some choice not yet made stood between the ending where they both walked out and the ending where one of them did not, and that the choice was hers, and that she did not yet know what it was, and that she would not know until she was inside it, with no time left to choose again. Wednesday Addams woke screaming, which she had not done since she was 9. The thing was already on her wrist. The cold dormitory was full of the sound of 5 Slytherin girls sitting up in the dark, and Wednesday cut the scream off mid-breath through sheer cold will, and lay rigid in the bottle-green dark with her heart slamming against her ribs and the 2 endings burning behind her eyes, and she understood 3 things with the terrible clarity that only ever came to her in the worst hour of the night. The first was that the working was 3 days away, on the new moon, and that she had run out of time to wait. The second was that Tobias Ackerley was not a villain and never had been, that he was a boy being tortured into an instrument exactly as she had suspected, and that there was, perhaps, still a version of him that could be reached before the dark made him into the figure with the knife. And the third was the one she did not want, the one she had been outrunning for 3 weeks, standing now at the foot of her bed where it had finally caught her. That she had been hiding all of this from Harry, that she had violated the one clause of the alliance he had asked for and she had agreed to, that an equal does not decide what the other can handle, and that the saved ending and the severed ending might hang on exactly that, on whether she walked into the next 3 days as half of a pair that told each other the truth, or as a soloist who had decided, one secret at a time, that she alone would carry the weight of the boy she loved. She had told herself every night for 3 weeks that the silence was a kindness. Lying in the cold dark with the 2 endings flickering behind her eyes, she finally admitted the truth she had been refusing, that it had never been a kindness at all. It had been the old architecture reasserting itself, the fortress with the gate welded shut, the 16-year decision that the safe number of people to trust was 0. She had let Harry inside the walls, and then, the instant the stakes became unbearable, she had begun quietly building a smaller fortress inside the first one, with him on the outside of it, and called it protection, and it was not protection. It was the oldest reflex she had. It was her being underneath everything, still alone, still a soloist, still convinced that she was the only one strong enough to hold the worst of it. It was, she understood at last, precisely the weakness Aldous Mercer was counting on. She made her cold decision in the worst hour of the night, and it was the hardest one of her life, and it was this: that she would go to Tobias Ackerley first, alone before dawn, not to confront him as a traitor, but to reach him as the only person in the castle who understood exactly what it was to love someone enough to burn the world for them. And that then, whatever she learned, she would go to Harry, and she would tell him everything, every piece, the knife and the letter and the 3 weeks of silence, and she would let him be as angry as the betrayal of her silence deserved. Because the alternative was to keep building the smaller fortress, and the smaller fortress led to the severed ending, she was suddenly and totally certain of it, the ending where one of them stood alone in the wreckage looking at something on the ground. She would rather be screamed at by an equal than be safe as a soloist. She had learned that, at least in 3 weeks, it would have to be enough. That same night, 2 floors above the chamber that waited beneath the east wing, Aldous Mercer was explaining patience to a prefect who had run out of it. "It's 3 days, Cassius Yaxley said. He was pacing, which Mercer disliked. A man who paced had already lost the argument and was merely walking off the loss. 3 days, and we still don't have Potter secured, and now they've started turning my people. Pusey's gone, vanished behind their protection, won't even look at me. 2 more wavering." The girl burned Selwyn's face with a flower of frost that won't heal, and he flinches every time the temperature changes. "They dismantled 6 of our best on the dueling platform in front of the whole school. And you want to go ahead on schedule on the new moon into a working we get exactly 1 attempt at." "I want to go ahead because of all of that," Mercer said. He did not rise. He sat in the firelight with a glass of the old wine and watched his prefect fray, and his calm was the calm of a man who has already seen the ending and is merely waiting for the others to arrive at it. "You are frightened, Cassius, and your fear is making you stupid, so let me do your thinking for you since you are clearly not using the equipment. Everything you have just listed as a problem is, in fact, the plan working." Cassius stopped pacing. "Explain that. They are turning your people. Good. A society that sheds its cowards before the working is a society purified for it. They burned Selwyn. Good. Every student in this castle now believes the Addams girl is a monster who maims for love, which means that when she walks into my chamber 3 nights from now and does something monstrous, no one will be surprised and no one will ask whether she was provoked." He sipped the wine. "They dismantled 6 duelists on a platform. Good. They showed the entire school and me exactly how they fight. As one mind, each watching the other's flank. Do you understand what that tells me, Cassius? It tells me that I no longer need to capture Potter at all. I need only to threaten the girl, and he will walk into the chamber on his own 2 feet to save her, and she will walk in to save him, and the 2 of them will deliver to my circle, voluntarily, the vessel and the anchor both, gift-wrapped in exactly the devotion they think makes them strong." He smiled into the fire. "I asked the circle to find me a way to make Potter willing. The girl made him willing. She made him a person with something to lose. A boy with nothing to protect is impossible to lead anywhere. A boy in love will follow his beloved in any room you can get her into, and I can get her into any room because she will follow him. And the key, Ackerley, will open the door because his sister is dying and grief is the most reliable engine ever built." Mercer set down the glass. "Stop pacing, Cassius. Attend to recruitment. Leave the unlocking to me. In 3 nights I will have 50 years of a conduit's fire bound into that stone, and the girl will be either dead or broken trying to stop me, and you will finally understand that everything you called a problem this month was me, winning slowly in a way too patient for you to recognize as victory." He looked into the flames. "The only thing that could ruin it now is if they somehow learned that the door would be opened by a friend, and had time to prepare for the betrayal instead of being broken open by it. And they cannot learn that because the only people who know are you, me, and a weeping boy who would rather die than say it aloud." He smiled. "So you see, there is nothing left to fear but your own nerves. Master those, and the new moon is ours." It was, Wednesday would reflect afterward, an almost perfect piece of reasoning. He had accounted for everything except the one variable no strategist ever accounts for in time: that the weeping boy who would rather die than say it aloud had, an hour before, taken the cold hand of a necromancer in an owlery, and chosen, for the first time in 3 weeks, the other door. She found Tobias Ackerley in the owlery an hour before dawn, which was where Thing had told her he went when he could not sleep, to stand among the birds in the cold, and the smell of straw, and write letters to a sister he was no longer certain he could save. He did not hear her come in. She had intended it that way. She stood in the doorway of the round stone tower with the owls shifting and muttering on their perches above her, and watched him for a moment, a thin boy with sandy hair and an open, decent, exhausted face. A face built for cheerful, ordinary things, a face that had no business in a story like this one, bent over a half-written letter by the light of a single guttering candle, and she revised one final time the plan she had walked up the tower with. She had come prepared to frighten him. She had Thing in her sleeve and the cold at her command, and a lifetime of practice at making boys talk. Looking at the back of his bowed, exhausted head, she put all of it away because she understood suddenly that fear was the one thing this boy had too much of already, and that Mercer had built him out of fear, and that the only key that would turn in a lock that fear had made was the opposite of fear. Her name is Iris, Wednesday said quietly. Your sister, she is 9. She has a wasting curse the healers at St. Mungo's cannot name, and you have been writing her letters you do not send because you cannot decide which lie to tell her, and a man with a warm voice has told you that he knows someone who can lift it, and the price will be small, and you have a knife in your drawer that you have not decided what to do with. Tobias Ackerley went very still. Then he turned slowly, the candle throwing his shadow huge and trembling up the curved stone wall, and his face when he saw her was not the face of a guilty man caught. It was the face of a drowning man who has stopped swimming, almost relieved, because the worst thing has finally happened and he no longer has to dread it. You're going to kill me, he said. It was not a question. I heard what you did on the pitch, to Selwyn, to the others. They touched Potter and you burned them. His voice cracked. I've been waiting for you for 3 weeks, every time a door opened. Every time the temperature dropped, I thought, good, at least it'll be over. At least I won't have to. He looked down at his own hands, empty now that had held the knife. Do it, please, before I do the thing he wants. I'd rather you burned me than I opened that door. And Wednesday Addams, who had come to this castle a soloist, who had spent 16 years certain that the safe number of people to love was 0, stood in the cold owlery before a boy begging her to kill him so that he would not have to betray his friend. And she did the thing that the old architecture would never have permitted, the thing that 3 weeks of an impossible boy had taught her. The thing that was either her salvation or her ruin, and that she would not know which until she was standing in the chamber with no time left to choose again. She crossed the owlery, and she crouched in front of Tobias Ackerley exactly as she had crouched in front of Bram Selwyn on the pitch, and she did not bring the cold, and she did not bring the fire, and she said, no. He blinked at her through his tears. I am not going to kill you, Tobias Ackerley, Wednesday said, because you are not my enemy, and I do not waste fire on the wrong people, and because I have spent 3 weeks believing you were a knife, and I have just discovered that you are a brother, and I know something about brothers. Her black eyes held his in the candlelight. I know that there is no price a person will not consider to save someone they love. I know it because there is a boy in this castle for whom I would burn down everything I have ever valued, including myself, and Aldous Mercer knows it too, and he has built his entire plan on the certainty that love makes a person into a handle he can pull. He pulled yours. He found a dying child and a desperate brother and a knife, and he has been turning you for weeks, and you have been letting him, because you cannot bear to watch your sister die when a warm voice keeps telling you that you could save her by opening one door. She lined in. He made a mistake, Tobias. The same mistake he is about to make with me. He found 2 people who love someone enough to be a weapon, and he assumed that meant we could be aimed. He did not consider that a weapon which loves might decide in the last moment to turn in his hand. Tobias Ackerley stared at her. You can't understand. If I don't open the door, Iris dies, he told me. He said there's a window, that the curse can only be lifted before the new moon, that after that it's too deep, that she'll be gone by midsummer. Don't do this, my sister dies, and it'll be because I chose Potter over her, and I'll have to live with that, and I can't, I'd rather. The knife was not in his hand, but his hand made the shape of it. I'd rather it was me. Iris is not going to die, Wednesday said. You can't promise that. I do not promise things, I have told you. I inform people of what I have decided, and then I make the world agree with me, and I have a great deal of experience in making the world. She rose and she held out her cold hand to the boy on the floor of the owlery. The curse on your sister has a name. The healers at St. Mungo's cannot find it because it is not in their books. It is in mine. It is a binding decay, the same family of magic as the hex they used on Harry on the pitch, and it does not lift before the new moon, Tobias. That is a lie. It is the lie Mercer needed to give you a deadline, because a man without a deadline thinks, and a man who thinks finds another way. Your sister's curse can be lifted any night. There is a competent necromancer and a great deal of nerve, and there is precisely one of those in this castle, and she is offering you her hand. She held his eyes. I will lift the curse on your sister, not before the new moon, after we have walked into Aldous Mercer's chamber and ended him, you and Harry and I on our own terms, with you on the right side of the door for once. That is the offer. You stop being Mercer's key. You become ours. And when it is done, I go to London and I take the curse off a 9-year-old girl, and you owe me a debt I will collect in ways you will not enjoy but will survive. Those are the terms. You may refuse them, but they are the only ones in which your sister lives, and you do not become the thing in your own nightmares. The owls shifted in the cold dark. The candle guttered. And Tobias Ackerley, weeping, took the cold hand of the most feared student in the castle, and chose, for the first time in 3 weeks, something other than the door. She told Harry at dawn, on the cold walk along the lake, and she told him all of it, and it went exactly as badly as she had known it would. She did not soften it. She did not build the beautiful little distinctions she was so good at building. She stood on the gray shore with the lake flat and black beside them, and she said, I have known for 3 weeks. The night of the pitch, Thing read his drawer, the letter, the knife. I knew the key was Tobias before you had finished suspecting it was anyone. I have watched you agonize over which of your friends could be turned, and I have known the answer the entire time, and I did not tell you, and I told myself it was to spare you the wound, and it was not. It was because the moment the stakes became unbearable, I started building a fortress inside our alliance with you on the outside of it, and I called it protection, and it was the oldest cowardice I have. I broke the one clause you asked for. I decided what you could handle. I am telling you now because the vision split last night, and one of the endings is the two of us walking out, and the other is one of us standing alone in the wreckage, and I have become certain that the difference between them is whether I keep being a soloist who lies to you for your own good, or become the equal I promised to be. So, I am done lying, be as angry as it deserves. I will not defend myself because there is no defense, only the truth, which is that I was wrong and that I have been wrong every night for 3 weeks, and that I would rather you hate me as an equal than trust me as a fool. Harry Potter listened to all of it without interrupting, which was worse than if he had shouted, and when she finished, the silence on the gray shore was the longest and coldest of the entire year. 3 weeks, he said finally. His voice was flat, and the flatness was the dangerous kind, the kind from the Great Hall on the morning of the claim. You knew it was Tobias for 3 weeks. You sat across a battle map for me every night and watched me try to figure out which of the people I love would betray me, and you let me do it, and you knew. Yes, I asked you. In this exact conversation weeks ago, I said I don't want it to be a friend, and you said you do not want it to be a friend, and you let me think you were agreeing with my fear when you were sitting on the answer to it. His jaw was tight. Do you understand what that did to me? Every meal, every practice. Looking at Ron, at Hermione, at Tobias, wondering which one. You let me suspect all of them for 3 weeks to spare me suspecting one of them. That's not mercy, Wednesday. That's you deciding you knew better than me what I could carry, which is the exact thing, the exact single thing I made you promise never to do. I know. Stop saying you know. Now there was heat in it. If you knew, you wouldn't have done it. You'd have come to me the first night and said, it's Tobias, here's the proof. What do we do? The way two people who are actually equals would. Instead, you decided, alone, for weeks. About my life and my friend and my betrayal, and you let me walk around blind because you'd appointed yourself the keeper of the worst of it. He turned to face her on the gray shore, and the green eyes were furious and wounded, and underneath both, something she had not expected, which was fear. That's the thing that actually scares me, not that you lied for the kindest possible reason, because that means you'll do it again. The next time the stakes are unbearable, you'll decide you're the only one strong enough to carry it, and you'll lock me out of my own life to protect me, and you'll be so sure you're right that I won't even see it happening. His voice dropped. I told you I'd spent my life being other people's project. I didn't think you'd turn out to be one more person who decided what was good for me without asking. It landed exactly where it was aimed, and it was true, and Wednesday Addams, who did not flinch, took it without flinching, because she had earned every word of it, and a soloist does not get to bleed when the equal she failed finally tells her the cost. You are right, she said, about all of it, including the part that frightens you, which is the part that frightens me too, because it is the truest. I will want to do it again. The old architecture does not dissolve because I have named it. It will be there in the chamber 3 nights from now, whispering that I am the only one strong enough, that I should send you somewhere safe and meet Mercer alone, that the saved ending is the one where I carry it and you survive in ignorance. I am telling you this so that you can watch for it. That is the only repair I have, Harry, not a promise that I have changed, because I have not. 3 weeks is not enough to unbuild 16 years. The repair is that I am handing you the blueprint of my worst reflex and asking you to be the alarm on it. When you see me start to decide what you can handle, you tell me, and I will stop, not because I will want to, but because I will have agreed in advance on a gray morning that you have the right. She held his eyes. I cannot give you a version of me that does not have this flaw. I can only give you the keys to the room where it lives. That is everything I have. It is more than I have ever given anyone. It is not enough, and I am offering it anyway. The lake was silent. A gray light was coming up over the water. Harry Potter looked at her for a long time, and the fury did not leave his face, but it was joined slowly by something else, the same reluctant, surprised thing she had seen in the restricted section the night she failed to apologize, the recognition of a person being more honest than the situation required. You really don't know how to do this, he said finally. Be close to someone without making yourself the wall between them and everything. No, Wednesday said. I do not. I told you on the tower. You are the flaw in an architecture that was working perfectly until you arrived. I'm improvising the entire structure of a thing other people apparently learn as children, and I am getting it wrong, and I will keep getting it wrong, and the only thing I can promise is that I will get it wrong in your direction, toward you, where you can see it and stop me instead of away from you, in secret, which is what I have been doing. A pause. I would understand if it is not enough. I have given you a real reason not to trust me 3 nights before we walk into the most dangerous room in the castle. That is its own kind of betrayal. I am aware of the irony. And Harry Potter, who had every right to walk away, who had been handed by the one person he had chosen to trust exactly the wound he had spent his life dreading, did the thing that made him her equal, the thing that no one in her family would ever have done, the thing that the cold soloist she had been could not have survived doing, and that the person she was becoming would spend the rest of her life trying to deserve. Tell me the rest of the vision, he said. The split, both endings, everything. Right now on this shore with nothing left out, he looked at her. We start over from here, not because I've forgiven the 3 weeks, I haven't, that's going to take longer than 3 nights, but because you came to me before the new moon instead of after, and you told me the truth when you could have kept building your fortress, and that's the first evidence I've had that you actually meant it when you called me an equal. So, we're equals starting now. Which means you don't get to carry the split ending alone either, tell me. And then we decide together what choice stands between the two of them, because if my life hangs on a decision someone makes in that chamber, I'd like a vote in who makes it. So she told him everything. The 2 chambers overlaid, the saved and the severed, the one figure standing alone looking at something on the ground. And on the gray shore in the cold dawn with 3 days left before the new moon, the 2 of them began to do the only thing that had ever bound them, which was to take an impossible problem apart and build out of its pieces. A different problem, one that Aldous Mercer, for all his cleverness, had not thought to prepare for, because it had never occurred to him that the key he had so carefully forged might be standing on the right side of the door, and that the weapon he intended to aim might have decided. On a gray morning by a black lake, to stop being a soloist and become, at last and against all her own architecture, half of something he could not price. They brought Tobias into it that night in the room that the castle gave to people who needed a place the castle would not remember, and the 3 of them built the countertrap the way Wednesday and Harry built everything, by taking Mercer's plan apart, finding its load-bearing assumption, and turning it into the thing that brought the whole structure down. His assumption is that the betrayal breaks Harry open, Wednesday said. She had drawn the chamber on the floor in chalk from her vision, the circle, the ring of hoods, the carved walls, the place where the figure with the knife would stand. The right needs a willing or broken vessel. Mercer's genius was to make the act of opening the door a wound deep enough to do the breaking. Tobias walks Harry into the chamber. Harry realizes his friend has betrayed him, and in that instant of grief and shock the vessel is soft enough to pour out. The whole working is built on 3 seconds of a boy's heart breaking. So we don't break, Harry said. So we don't break, Wednesday agreed. Tobias still opens the door. He still walks you in exactly as Mercer watches him do it, but you will already know. There will be no betrayal because the 2 of you will have rehearsed it, the surprise, the dawning horror, the grief. Mercer will watch Harry Potter's heart break on schedule, and it will be the finest piece of theater either of you has ever performed, and the vessel he reaches into to pour out will not be soft at all. It will be a loaded weapon wearing the face of a wounded boy. She looked at Tobias. Can you do it? Walk him in. Let Mercer believe you are his. Wear the part of the traitor all the way to the center of that circle, knowing the whole time that you are not. Tobias acridly looked at the chalk drawing on the floor, and at the 2 people who had, between one night and the next, turned him from a doomed boy into a soldier. I've been wearing the part of the traitor for 3 weeks, he said quietly. The only difference now is that this time it'll be a lie. I think I can manage being a liar to the man who tried to make me a murderer. Yes, I can do it. Then here is the shape of it, Wednesday said, and she laid it out piece by piece, the way Harry laid out battle maps, where Tobias would walk, where Harry would let himself be bound, where she would already be waiting in the dark beyond the candlelight, because Mercer's whole plan assumed that to threaten her was to draw Harry in, and the plan's blind spot was that it never imagined she might arrive first alone, by a road that did not go through the door at all. Mercer believes I will follow Harry into the chamber to save him. I will not. I will already be there. There is a second way into that room. The dead remember every door that was ever sealed, and there are a great many dead under the east wing, and they are fond of me. I go in ahead through the grave roads, and I wait in the dark beyond the carvings, and when Mercer has his ring assembled and his rite begun and his attention entirely on the vessel he thinks is breaking, the door he is watching opens to admit Tobias and Harry, and the dark behind him opens to admit me. He will be watching the front. We will already on the back. It is the lesson he taught us on the first Monday. Return to him with interest. Do not defend the position he expects you to defend. Make a new door out of his own ambush. Harry studied the chalk lines for a long moment. There's still the split, he said. Both endings start from here. We do all of this right, and it still ends 2 ways. Yes, Wednesday did not look away from him. I have stopped lying to you, Harry, including about this. The plan is good. The plan is the best either of us has ever built. And the vision still split, which means somewhere inside this room 3 nights from now there is a choice I cannot see, a moment the plan does not cover, and it decides whether we both walk out or one of us does not. I will not pretend the plan closes it. I will only tell you that I would rather walk into an unfixed future beside you with the truth between us than into a certain one alone. The split is the price of the new moon. We pay it together or not at all. Together, Tobias said, surprising them both, the word coming out of the doomed boy like a vow. Whatever the third thing is, whatever the choice turns out to be, you're getting me my sister back. The least I can do is stand in that room and make it 3 against the dark instead of 2. He thinks he's setting a trap, Harry said when she had finished and the plan had begun to take its shape between them. He is setting a trap, Wednesday said. We are simply going to be the thing inside it that he did not pack for. Tobias opens the door exactly as Mercer wants. We walk through it exactly as Mercer wants, and then in the one place he believes himself safe, surrounded by his hooded ring and his carved stone and his 50 years of stolen fire, he's going to discover that he has spent months building a beautiful cage and inviting into it the two people in the world least suited to being kept. She looked at the gray water. There is still the split two endings, one choice I cannot see. I will not pretend that away, Harry, not anymore, not even to comfort you. We are walking into a future I have seen end two ways, and I do not know which, and the not knowing is the price of the new moon. Then we walk in knowing it's two ways, Harry said, and we make it the first one. He almost smiled, together, on the record that there's no record. Together, Wednesday agreed, and this time the word was true all the way down, with nothing sealed beneath it, for the first time in 3 weeks, and somewhere 3 days ahead of them, beneath the east wing, in a chamber where the carvings turned to follow anyone who entered. The circle waited to be filled, and the future hung, unfixed, between the ending where they both walked out and the ending where one of them did not. Chapter 5 and Chapter 6. The faction strikes. The new moon came up black over the highlands, which is to say it did not come up at all, and the sky above Hogwarts was a starless well, and beneath the east wing the chamber Wednesday had dreamed on her first night finally opened its mouth to be fed. Wednesday Addams went down to it a different way, an hour earlier, through a door the living had forgotten and the dead had not. The grave roads were not on any map. They were the spaces between the sealed places, the corridors that had been walled up and built over across 1,000 years of a castle that buried its mistakes in its own foundations, and they belonged now to the things that had been walled up with them. A living person could not walk the grave roads. Wednesday could, because the dead were fond of her in the way that the dead are fond of anyone who treats them as company rather than horror, and because she had spent her first 6 weeks under the lake making their acquaintance against exactly this night. She went down through a crack behind a tapestry in the dungeons that no one else could find, and the cold closed over her like water, and she walked into a dark that had not seen light since the Plantagenets, with 24 of the east wings dead drifting at her back like a held breath. She did not hurry. Hurry was how the living announced themselves to the dark, and she had no intention of announcing anything. She walked the grave roads the way her grandmother had taught her to walk into a room full of enemies slowly, and as though already bored by their funerals, and the dead came with her, not because she commanded them. She had never been able to command the dead and had stopped trying when she was 11, but because she had asked, and because the thing that waited in the chamber ahead had spent a long time feeding on things like them, and the dead, it turned out, held grudges. She felt the chamber before she reached it, a wrongness in the dark, a heat where everything else was cold, the carved walls singing their unreadable song on the other side of 40 feet of stone. She found the place where the grave road pressed up against the back of the chamber, behind the carvings, in the dark beyond the candlelight, and she stopped there, and she waited, pressing herself into the cold and the silence and the company of the spent dead, and she watched the molten circle through the eyes of the things that had no eyes, and she did not move, and she did not breathe louder than the dark, and she let Aldous Mercer believe, 24 feet away through living stone, that the only door into his chamber was the one he was watching. That was the whole of the plan, distilled. He would watch the front, she would already own the back. He had taught it to a room full of children on the first Monday, and never once imagined it taught back to him by a girl who had walked in with the dead. Tobias Ackerley walked Harry Potter down to it a little before midnight, exactly as Aldous Mercer had arranged, and he played the traitor so well that Wednesday, watching through the eyes of the dead from the grave roads behind the walls, felt a cold flare of pride for the doomed decent boy who had chosen the harder door. He led Harry through a tapestry on the 4th floor and down a stair that had not been walked in a century, and at the bottom of it he turned and said, in a voice cracking with a grief that was 3 weeks real and tonight only half a lie, "I'm sorry, Harry, I'm so sorry. She's dying. My sister's dying, and they said you were the price," and Harry Potter's face broke open in dawning horror. Exactly on schedule, the finest piece of theater either of them had ever performed, and the door at the bottom of the stair swung wide to admit them, and the chamber beyond it was full of hooded figures and candlelight and a man with an old warm voice who believed completely that he had already won. He had built it beautifully. Wednesday would give him that to the end. The chamber was a perfect circle of black stone 40 feet across, ringed with carvings older than the school, and the carvings moved when you did not look at them, writhing slow figures that told a story no living eye was meant to read. In the floor the binding circle blazed, not chalk now but something molten, a ring of running light the color of a wound, and within it a smaller ring, and within that the apex point where the vessel would kneel. The auspex circles stood around the great ring in their hoods, 24 of them, the inner ring at the front and the wavering hangers-on at the back, and at the head of them all stood Aldous Mercer, no longer the smiling professor, robed and bareheaded and lit from below by the molten circle, and his handsome face had a new and terrible openness to it, the look of a man who has spent 20 years wearing a mask and has finally, in the one room where it is safe, taken it off. "Mr. Potter," Mercer said, and his voice filled the chamber, I confess I did not expect you to come quietly. I had prepared a dozen contingencies for your arrival. You have used none of them. You simply walked down here in the dark behind a weeping boy and looked betrayed and let yourself be led to the center of the most important working of my life." He smiled. "Do you know, I almost feel cheated. I built such a careful trap and you walked into it as though it were a door you had been looking for." Behind the carved wall in the dark of the grave roads, Wednesday Addams went very still, because that was the second time Mercer had said it, almost the words from her own thoughts, and a man who notices that a trap looks like a door is a man who is not entirely fooled. But Harry held the part. He stumbled to the apex of the circle as the inner ring's wands hurted him, and he sank to his knees on the molten light, and the binding came up out of the floor and took his wrists exactly as the vision had shown, and he bowed his black head, and to every hooded watcher in the chamber he was a broken boy delivered by a faithless friend, soft and ready to be poured out. Tobias Ackerley stood at the edge of the circle with the kitchen knife in his shaking hand. Mercer had required him to bring it. Wednesday understood now. The betrayer's own blade was part of the working, the wound made visible, and he wept, and the weeping was real, and the part he was playing and the boy he actually was had become, in the candlelight, impossible to tell apart. Mercer raised his arms, and he began to speak the words older than the stone, and the carvings on the walls began to glow, and the molten circle climbed toward Harry's bowed shoulders like water rising in a hold, and the rite began. Wednesday let it begin. That was the plan, and the plan was good, and the plan required her to wait in the dark until Mercer's whole attention was poured into the working, until the inner ring was lost in the chant, until the moment of maximum commitment when a thing in motion is hardest to stop, and the people moving it are least able to look behind them. She waited while the cosmic Baroque horror of it unfolded, the chamber filling with a light that had texture, that moved like oil and sang like glass, the carvings telling their unreadable story faster and faster, the smell of tallow and old blood thickening until the air itself seemed to clot. She waited until she saw in the molten light the first thread of Harry's leashed fire begin to rise out of him against his will, drawn up by the rite, a ribbon of green-gold power lifting off his bowed shoulders toward the hungry carved stone, the conduit beginning to pour, the candle being made of the fire. Then she stepped out of the dark behind the carved wall and she brought the cold. She did not announce herself. Announcing was for people who wanted a duel, and Wednesday Addams had not come to this chamber to duel. She came out of the grave road with 24 of the East Wings dead at her back, not as ghosts, the dead were past such theater, but as a pressure, a cold, a wrongness that rolled into the chamber ahead of her and guttered every candle in the ring to a blue thread, and the hooded figures of the Auspex circle turned, too late, exactly as Harry had turned the suit of armor on the first Monday, to find that the threat was no longer at the front of the room. "You built a beautiful cage, Professor," Wednesday said, and her voice carried the way his had, filling the chamber, cold as the space between the stars. "And you invited into it the two people in the world least suited to being kept. I did not follow Harry into your trap. I was here before he arrived. I have been standing in your dark for an hour, listening to you congratulate yourself, and I have decided that the most fitting end to your working is the one where it is fed, after all, only not with what you intended." And the fire came up out of the cold. It came the way it had come on the pitch, but vast now, a working of her own to answer his. The chamber's stolen warmth ripped out of the air, and the stone and the 24 hooded bodies all at once and turned to flame. A roaring blue-white column that bloomed in the heart of the Auspex circle and threw the inner ring screaming back from the molten ring. She had spent 16 years learning to do small, precise cruelties. She had never, until tonight, had a reason to do a large one, and the chamber became, in the space of 3 heartbeats, an inferno of her making, the carvings on the walls cracking in the heat, the hooded robes igniting, the convocation that was to have anchored 50 years of stolen power dissolving into a panicked stampede of burning, fleeing children who had thought they were joining a dueling club. She did not burn the hangers-on. Even now, even here, she was precise. The fire that took the inner ring parted around the wavering ones at the back, around Aldrich Pusey's old friends, around the frightened and the merely ambitious, and herded them toward the door and out, alive, singed, cured forever of the Auspex circle. The fire she meant to kill with, she aimed, and she aimed it at the men who had reached into Harry Potter's cage, and the chamber filled with the smell of burning that the title of every dark story is built on, and Wednesday Addams walked into the heart of her own inferno toward the apex of the circle, untouched, the cold pouring off her even as the fire roared and reached the bound boy at the center of it. "Now, Harry," she said. And Harry Potter, who had knelt soft and bound and broken for exactly as long as the plan required, lifted his head, and his eyes were not soft and were not broken and had never for one instant been either, and he broke the binding from inside. This was the part Mercer had never priced, the part the wizarding world had spent 6 years refusing to look at directly. The rite had been pulling Harry's fire out of him. Harry simply stopped letting it be pulled and pulled back. The leashed cosmic power that the cupboard and the curse scar and a lifetime of being told he was ordinary had never managed to put out came up out of him all at once. Not as a ribbon now, but as a flood, green gold and enormous, more than a school could hold, more than a man could bind, and it shattered the binding circle from the apex outward in a ring of light that knocked the surviving inner ring off their feet and cracked the molten ring of running light into dark fragments across the black stone. For one moment the chamber held two fires, her cold-born blue-white inferno and his green-gold flood, and where they met, around the two of them at the center of the broken circle, they did not fight, they braided. The frost and the flood, the cold and the storm, the two magics that had fought as one mind on a dueling platform now fused into a single working that neither of them had planned and neither of them could have made alone. A thing the chamber had no carving for, and the Auspex Circle's surviving inner ring looked up from the floor into the heart of it and understood, too late, exactly what Aldous Mercer had assembled in one room and called a victory. There was a moment in the heart of it that belonged to Tobias Ackerley. The rite was not finished even with the circle broken. Wednesday would understand the mechanics only later, but Mercer understood them then, and as his working came apart he turned fast to the one piece of it still standing where he had placed it, the betrayer at the edge of the circle, the kitchen knife in his hand, the wound made flesh. The blade, Tobias, Mercer said, and the oil was gone and the command was naked. The vessel is loose, seal it, one cut from the hand that loves him and the right holds. Your sister lives, everything I promised, but you must do it now. And for one heartbeat the whole chamber hung on a doomed decent boy with a knife and a dying sister and a warm voice telling him that one cut would save her. Tobias Ackerley looked at the blade in his hand. He looked at Harry, kneeling and blazing at the center of the broken circle, the friend he had walked all the way down into the dark. He looked at the man who had spent 3 weeks building him into an instrument out of his own love for a 9-year-old girl in a hospital bed in London. Her name is Iris, Tobias said, and his voice did not shake any more. And you don't get to use her, not for one more second. And he did not cut Harry. He turned, and with the whole of his thin shaking strength he drove the kitchen knife not into his friend, but into the molten ring of running light at the apex of the circle. The betrayer's blade into the heart of the working it was meant to seal, and the rite, which had been built to be completed by exactly that knife in exactly that hand, took the betrayal it had been promised and got, instead, the opposite, the blade of the loving hand turned against the working rather than the vessel. Love refusing at the last instant to be spent, and the molten circle convulsed and cracked further and threw Tobias backward across the black stone in a spray of dying light. It was not a large act. He was not a fighter. He never had been. He was a cheerful, ordinary boy who had been dragged into a story too large for him. But it was the act the whole rite had been engineered around, reversed, and the reversal mattered. Mercer screamed the first time anyone had heard the priest scream, because the working had reached for the wound at its center and found, where the betrayal should have been, a boy choosing his friend over his own dying sister and trusting a cold girl's promise to make it come out right. A liturgy 6 centuries old, undone at its keystone by the one thing it had been built to weaponize and had never once imagined could refuse. Wednesday saw it through the braided fire, and she added Tobias Ackerley to the very short list she kept of people who had surprised her, and she swore in that instant that whatever else the night cost, the boy's sister would live, because a debt like the one she had just watched paid was not a thing the Addams family left unanswered. Cassius Yaxley broke first. He was clever, he had always been clever. Cleverness was the only thing that had ever made him dangerous, and cleverness now did the one thing it could do, which was the arithmetic. He looked at the braided fire and the broken circle and the two students at the center of it, and he looked at Aldous Mercer standing alone at the head of a working that had just turned in his hand, and Cassius Yaxley made the calculation every intelligent predator makes when its alpha has led it into a fire, and he chose survival. Mercer lied to you, Cassius shouted to the surviving ring, scrambling backward, his hands already up and empty in surrender. He told us it was safe, he told us the boy was secured. He's killed half of us for a working that was never going to. I'm done, do you hear me? I'm done. I never knew what he was, and he turned and ran for the door with 3 of the inner ring at his heels, abandoning the master he had served, and Wednesday let him go, because Cassius Yaxley running was a story that would do more damage to Aldous Mercer than Cassius Yaxley dead. And because the man at the head of the chamber had just lost his hand, his ring, his working, and his 50 years of stolen fire in the space of a minute, and was about to become very interesting. Mercer had not moved. That was the thing Wednesday noticed through the braided fire, the thing that turned the cold satisfaction of the moment to something colder. The chamber was an inferno, his circle was dead or fled, his right was shattered, his prefect had betrayed him, and Aldous Mercer stood alone at the head of the broken ring with his arms still raised and an expression on his open, maskless face that was not defeat and was not even fear. It was delight. Oh, Mercer breathed, and the oil was gone from his voice, and what was under it was older and worse. Oh, that is magnificent, both of you together. Do you have any idea at all, how long I have searched for a vessel and an anchor of that quality, and here you are, the two of you, fused in my circle, doing the binding for me." He laughed, and the laugh was the worst sound in the chamber. "You think you have ruined the working. Children, you have perfected it. I built this right to harvest one conduit over 50 years. You have just shown me a thing I did not know was possible, two conduits, braided, willing, pouring out a fire greater than either alone. I do not need the circle anymore. I do not need the circle at all. I needed only to be in the room when you did that." And he brought his raised arms down, and he spoke a word that was not part of any rite, a word that was older than the chamber, older than the school, older than the language the carvings told their story in, and the chamber answered him. Wednesday had thought him a clever professor who had learned an old rite. She understood in the instant the chamber answered that she had made the same error everyone made about the dangerous one, that Aldous Mercer was not the architect of the working but its priest, that he had not learned the rite, he had served it for longer than he had worn the face of a man, and that the carved walls were not telling a story he had found. They were telling his. The braided fire bent toward Mercer, both of them at once, hers and Harry's, the cold and the flood and the green gold flood, dragged off its course by the word he had spoken, pulled toward the maskless thing at the head of the chamber that opened its arms to receive it, and Wednesday felt her own fire turning against her, felt the right she had thought she was ending reach up through the soles of her feet and begin instead to end her, and beside her Harry's flood guttered and bent and began to pour, not into the carved stone, but into the man, and the man drank it and grew, and the handsome professor's shape began to come apart at the edges into something the chamber had been built to hold, and the children had been built to feed. This was the choice. Wednesday understood it in the half-second the dark had hidden from her for 6 weeks, the moment the vision had split around, the thing the plan did not cover. The plan had been perfect for the Aldous Mercer they had imagined, a clever man with a stolen right. It had no answer for what he actually was, and there was no time to build a different plan, no time to take the problem apart and make a new door. There was only the braided fire bending toward the priest and the two of them being poured out into him, and one choice hers, the one the dark had refused to show her because it had not yet been made. She could pull Harry's fire back into him and out of Mercer's reach. She knew how, the grave craft would do it. She could wrench the flood off its bent course and slam it back into the boy and break the priest's hold on him. But she could only reach one of the two braided fires, and the other, hers, her own cold-born inferno, would pour on into Mercer unopposed. And a priest that old drinking that much would not be slowed by half a working, and she would be standing at the apex of a broken circle with her fire gone into him and nothing left, and the vision's second ending was suddenly, blindingly clear. One figure standing in the wreckage, looking at something on the ground. The choice was which fire to save. And the dark had hidden it because the dark had known that she would not need to be told what to do, that the girl who had spent 16 years certain the safe number of people to love was zero would not hesitate for even the half-second the choice allowed, because she had already weighed her life against his on her first night in the castle, and the scale had settled, and it was not a thing she could reweigh now that it was set. She pulled Harry's fire back into Harry. She did it with everything she had, the whole cold grave craft of her family, wrenching the green gold flood off its bent course and slamming it home into the boy at her side, breaking Mercer's hold on the vessel he most wanted, and the cost of it, the price the vision had hidden, was that for one instant she had nothing left to defend her own fire, and her own cold-born inferno poured on into the priest unopposed, and Aldous Mercer drank it, all of it. The whole of the working she had spent herself to make, and what it did to him was not what he had planned. He had expected a conduit's clean fire. He got a necromancer's, cold-born, grave-fed, a fire made by taking warmth out of the dead, and the chamber was full of the dead, the East Wing's dead that Wednesday had walked in with, 24 of them pressed against the carved walls at her back. And when Mercer drank her fire, he drank them too, the whole cold weight of the grave roads pouring into a priest who had built his long life on feeding and had never once in all his centuries been fed something that fed back. He came apart. Not finished, Wednesday saw it even as the working tore through her and dropped her to her knees on the black stone, even as Harry's name left her mouth and the flood she had saved roared back into him. Aldous Mercer was not finished. The priest was too old and too deep for one swallowed inferno to end, but he was unmade at the edges, his stolen shape boiling off him, the centuries of mask burning away to show the thing underneath. And the thing underneath screamed in a register that cracked the last of the carvings on the walls, and gathered the boiling wreck of itself and fled up out through the cracked stone in the starless dark, a priest reduced to a wound fleeing the chamber it had built, leaving behind a broken circle and a dead circle and 3 children in the guttering blue dark. It was not the ending. Wednesday knew it even as she knelt gasping on the black stone with her fire gone and the cold weight of 24 spent dead pressing the breath out of her. Mercer had escaped. The priest was loose, wounded, unmade at the edges, but alive, and worse than that, far worse, the thing that would bring them all to the final reckoning. He had drunk a swallow of 2 braided conduits before she broke his hold, and a priest that old does not forget the taste of a thing it has searched centuries for. He would come back. He would come back for the rest of it, and Harry, she turned her head. The flood she had saved had poured back into Harry all at once, more than she had wrenched out, the partial right slamming a lifetime's leashed fire back into a boy who had spent that lifetime keeping it banked. And Harry Potter knelt at the apex of the broken circle with green gold light pouring off his skin in visible threads, his eyes open and blazing and not entirely his own. The leash she had named on the first day burned through at last by a right that had pried him open and a rescue that had poured him full. And he was changed, she could see it, the candle made back into a fire, and the fire no longer sure it remembered how to be a candle. Harry, she said from her knees with nothing left. He turned to her, blazing, and for one terrible moment she did not know what would look back out of the green gold light. Then the threads of fire began slowly to bank, and Harry Potter's eyes were his own again, exhausted and astonished in his, and he crawled across the broken stone to where she knelt and got his arms around her before she could fall, and the two of them held each other at the center of the wreckage they had made alive, both of them, the saved ending, the one where two figures stand in the ruin and not one. But it was not over, and they both knew it, and the knowing was in the way they held on. "You pulled my fire back," Harry said into her hair, hoarse. "You had one choice and it was mine or yours, and you chose mine, and you poured yourself into him to do it. You promised me on the pitch. We don't do the noble idiot thing where one of us dies so the other can grieve." "I did not die," Wednesday said. "I am extremely difficult to kill. I learned it from you." She pulled back enough to look at him, at the green gold still banking under his skin, at the changed thing he had become. "And I broke no promise. I did not weigh my life against yours. I weighed his hold on you against my fire, and I spent my fire, and I am still here, kneeling in the ruin, holding the proof that I chose correctly." The vision split, Harry, two endings. "I have just seen which one we are standing in. We are standing in the one where there are two of us. That is the only arithmetic I have ever cared about, and tonight, against a priest older than the school, it came out the way I needed it to." Across the chamber, at the edge of the broken circle, Tobias Ackerley lay where the working's collapse had thrown him, and he was breathing, and the kitchen knife had fallen from his hand into the cracks of the dead circle, unused, a betrayer's blade that had never once been turned, and that was its own kind of ending too. The boy who had been built to be the wound had walked all the way to the center of the chamber and out the other side without ever becoming the thing the letter had purchased. He would live. His sister would live. Wednesday would see to it after. The doomed decent boy had survived his own doom, which was rarer in stories like this one than any fire. Far above them, the silver instrument in the headmaster's office screamed and went dark, burned out by a surge of energy it had no scale for, and an old man with a frozen waterfall beard rose from his chair in alarm and began, finally, too late as good men always begin things, to come down. They came down too late to do anything but witness, which was, Wednesday thought afterward, the proper role of authority in a story like this one. Dumbledore arrived first, robes streaming, wand up and blazing with a light that pushed back the guttering blue dark, and he stopped at the cracked threshold of the chamber and took it in with one sweep of his old cold eyes. The broken circle, the dead inner ring, the smoking carvings, the boy at the apex with green gold fire still banking under his skin, and the Addams girl kneeling in the wreckage holding him. McGonagall came behind and made a sound Wednesday had not believed the woman capable of, and went at once to Tobias Ackerley where he lay breathing at the circle's edge. And Snape came last, black eyes moving across the chamber and arriving, as he always arrived, at the correct and unwelcome conclusions far faster than his colleagues, and his gaze stopped on Harry, on the fire under the boy's skin, and something in the sallow face went still in a way that was almost grief. "Mercer," Dumbledore said. It was not quite a question, was never a professor, Wednesday said from her knees, with nothing left in her voice but the truth. He was the right's priest, not its student. He has served the thing in these walls for longer than he has worn a man's face, and tonight he drank a swallow of 2 conduits braided, and I burned him with the cold of 24 of your dead, and it unmade him at the edges, and he fled. He is not finished. He is loose and wounded, and he will come back, because he has finally tasted the thing he spent his centuries searching for, and a creature that old does not forget a taste. She held the old man's eyes. "You warned me in your office against the slope. You warned the wrong child about the wrong danger. The monster in this castle was never going to be me. It was the man you hired to teach your children to defend themselves against the dark, and the dark was wearing his face the whole time, and none of you looked, because he smiled well, and the children he was harvesting were not the kind anyone counts." Albus Dumbledore looked at the wreckage of the chamber for a long time, and the twinkle was so far gone from his eyes that Wednesday wondered if it would ever come back. "No," he said at last, heavily. "We did not look. That is the oldest failure there is, and I am too old to have any excuse left for committing it." He lowered his wand. "You saved the boy, Miss Addams, at a cost I can see written on you, though I suspect you would sooner die than name it. And you spared the children at the back of that circle. I can see where the fire parted around them. A monster does not part the fire." He looked at her, old and cold and entirely without theater. I owe you an apology and the castle owes you a debt, and I find I no longer know which of us is the dangerous one in this room. Perhaps that was always the wrong question. It was, Wednesday agreed. The question was never whether I was dangerous. I am. The question was only ever who I would point it at. You spent 6 weeks worrying I would point it at the castle. I have spent those 6 weeks pointing it at the one thing in the castle that needed burning, and I am not finished, and when Aldous Mercer comes back, and he will, I am going to require you to stand out of my way while I point it at him again. She rose, swaying, Harry's arm coming around her to hold her up, the two of them propping each other in the ruin. You may consider that a courtesy, headmaster. I am informing you, not asking. I do not ask. But you have been honest with me tonight when you could have arrested me, and I find that honesty is a currency I am willing, occasionally, to repay. Snape spoke then, for the first time, from where he crouched over the dead inner ring, and his voice was dry as the grave. The Ackerley boy will live, so will the ones who fled, Yaxley among them, no doubt, already 3 corridors away rehearsing the version where he was a victim. His black eyes lifted to Harry, to the banking fire. But this one is changed, headmaster. The right pried him open, and the girl poured him full to save him, and a leash that is burned through does not grow back. Whatever Potter was this morning, he is something else tonight. You should decide quickly whether that frightens you, because the thing that fled this chamber has already decided that it does not, and is even now working out how to use it. It was the most useful thing anyone said all night, and Wednesday added another grade to her long-revised estimate of Severus Snape, and resolved to act on the warning, because he was right, and because the changed boy holding her up in the wreckage was the most dangerous and most precious thing in the chamber, and the priest in the dark knew it too. And somewhere in the starless night above the highlands, a priest reduced to a wound gathered the boiling wreck of itself in the dark, and remembered the taste of 2 braided fires, and began with the terrible patience of a thing that had waited centuries already, to plan its return, not to a chamber this time, not to careful working, but to the 2 children who had taken from it the one thing it had searched its whole long unnatural life to find, and who would have to be made to give it back. The faction was broken, the circle was scattered, the inner ring dead or fled, Cassius Yaxley a fugitive whose terrified story would spread through the castle by morning, the chamber a cracked and smoking ruin beneath the east wing. They had won, and Mercer was alive, and Harry was changed, and the war that had begun on a Quidditch pitch was not over at all. It had only at last met the thing it was actually about. Wednesday Addams knelt in the wreckage with the boy she had saved in her arms, and the priest's escape burning in her certainty, and she understood that the new moon had not ended the story. It had merely shown her at last the shape of the ending she would have to make, the real one, the final one, the one the vision had never reached because it lay past the edge of everything the dark had been willing to show. There was still a priest to burn, and she had spent her fire. And the only thing left in the chamber that could make more was the changed boy in her arms, blazing and exhausted in hers, and the next time they walked into the dark to finish this, they would walk in not as a vessel and an anchor, not as a weapon and its handle, but as the one thing Aldous Mercer had spent his centuries failing to imagine. 2 fires that had learned to braid. Chapter 6 and Chapter 7 equals for 9 days Aldous Mercer did not come back, and the castle made the mistake of calling it peace. Wednesday Addams did not call it peace. She knew what a wounded thing did when it went quiet. It healed, and it watched, and it learned the shape of what had hurt it so that next time it could come at the angle the hurt could not reach. She spent the 9 days the way the priest spent them, healing and watching and learning, except that she had 2 advantages he did not. She had the dead who had felt him pass through their dark and could tell her, in their wordless way, the direction of his hiding, and she had Harry, the changed Harry. That was the thing the 9 days were really about, beneath the hunting, and they both knew it. The right had burned through the leash she had named on the first day, and a leash that is burned through does not grow back, Snape had said, and Snape had been right. The boy who had banked a lifetime's worth of cosmic fire because the world kept telling him he was ordinary could not bank it anymore. It was simply there now, all of it, awake under his skin, and the 9 days were Harry Potter learning to live as the thing he had always been and never been allowed to be, with the only person in the castle who had recognized it across a crowded hall on her first night, before he had recognized it himself. It wants out, he told her on the 3rd night in the room that did not remember them, where they had taken to going so that he could let the fire off its banking without frightening the castle. The green-gold light moved on the walls, all the time now, not in a bad way, not like it wants to hurt anyone. It's more like he searched for it and found it, and the finding cost him the dry flatness he hid behind. Like a part of me that spent 16 years being told to make itself small finally got told it could stand up straight, and now it doesn't want to sit back down. And I don't think it should. That's the part that scares me. I don't want it to sit back down. I spent my whole life being smaller than I am so that other people would be comfortable, and I'm done Wednesday. The right was the worst night of my life, and it gave me the one thing nobody ever would, which is permission to be the size I actually am. Then be it, Wednesday said. I did not cross an ocean of loneliness to find an equal and then ask him to shrink so that the small could sleep at night, stand up straight, frighten the castle. The castle has been frightening children for 1,000 years. It can stand to be frightened back by one. She looked at the fire moving under his skin, and she did not flinch from it, which was its own kind of vow. You asked me once whether mine offended you, and I told you it should not because you handed me the leash yourself. The leash is gone now. There is no longer a hand on the other end of you, Harry, and you are still standing in front of me choosing not to burn the world, and that is the answer to every fear anyone has ever had about what you are. The leash was never what made you safe. You did. You always did. The leash was just the lie that let the small pretend the choice was theirs and not yours. Harry looked at her for a long moment, the fire banking and rising under his skin, and then he said the thing that the 9 days had been building toward, the thing that would carry them into the dark to finish it. When we find him, he said, I'm not holding back. On the pitch I asked you to be precise instead of angry, and you were, and a boy lived who maybe shouldn't have. I'm not going to ask you that this time, and I'm not going to do it either. Mercer is centuries old, and he's wearing the dark like a coat, and he has tasted what the two of us are together, and he is never, ever going to stop coming for it. There's no precise version of this. There's no version where he lives and we sleep. So when we find him, we end him all the way with everything we are. The green eyes held hers, blazing, certain. I just need to know you're with me on that. Not the least version of you that I talked down on the pitch. The other one, the slope. I need the slope, Wednesday, just this once. Because the thing we're hunting can only be killed by the two of us at the size we actually are, and I am done being smaller than I am, and I need you to be done being kinder than you are. And Wednesday Addams, who had spent her whole life waiting for someone to ask her for exactly that and had assumed by 16 that no one ever would, looked at the boy made of fire and felt the last of the cold thing behind her sternum, the locked room, the loneliness in ambition's coat, finally and completely open. Harry Potter, she said, I have been the slope since I was 9 years old, and I have spent every year since looking for the one person who would stand at the top of it and ask me to be exactly what I am instead of begging me to be less. Her black eyes did not waver. You are asking. I have waited 16 years to be asked. When we find him, you will not have to talk me down because there will be nothing to talk down. There will only be the two of us, at the size we actually are, doing to an ancient and terrible thing precisely what it has spent centuries doing to children, and I am going to enjoy it, and I am not going to apologize for enjoying it. And afterward you are going to look at what I am with the fire still in your eyes, and you are not going to flinch, because you are the only person who never has. A pause. That is the whole of it. You wanted the slope. I am the slope. Let us go and find a priest to throw off the top of it. The dead told her where he was on the 9th night. He had gone to ground in the one place the castle had forgotten more thoroughly than the grave roads, the drowned village beneath the lake, the original settlement that had stood on the shore before the school was raised, flooded 1,000 years ago when the founders dammed the valley, its stone houses and its little church still standing in the cold black water 60 feet down, inhabited now only by the merpeople who avoided it, and the dead who did not. Mercer had gone there to heal because the drowned dead were old and weak and easy feeding, and because no living wizard would think to look for him at the bottom of a lake, and because the priest's long unnatural life had taught him that the safest place to hide was always the place the living found unbearable. He had made one error. The drowned dead were old and weak. But they remembered in the dim way the long dead remember anything, that they had been drowned, that the valley had been flooded over their homes and their children, and that the thing now feeding on them in the dark had a voice like the founders who had done it. And when Wednesday Addams came down through the cold black water with Harry Potter blazing beside her like a green gold sun in the deep, the drowned dead did not flee her the way the living fled. They rose to meet her. They had been waiting 1,000 years for someone to be angry on their behalf, and she was, and that was enough. They went down together. That was the only way it could end, and they both knew it, and there was no argument about it this time, no claws, no talking down. They sealed their lungs with the same charm and braided their magic before they entered the water so that the cold would not take them. His fire warming her, her cold tempering him. The two workings fused into one the way they had fused in the chamber, and they sank into the drowned dark of the lake as a single thing. And the merpeople watched them pass with wide, wary eyes and did not interfere, because even the merpeople could tell that whatever was going down to the drowned village that night was not a matter the living should put a hand into. The village was a ruin of stone houses under 60 feet of black water, lit only by the green gold light pouring off Harry, and at its center stood the little drowned church, and in the church, healing in the dark on 1,000 years of drowned dead, was the thing that had been Aldismer's. It had stopped pretending to be a man. Wednesday had seen it begin to come apart in the chamber, the centuries of mask boiling off. 9 days in the deep had finished what her fire had started, and what waited in the drowned church was the priest with no face left to wear, a thing of robes and hunger and a voice that came now not from a mouth but from the water itself, from the cold, from the carved dark of a creature that had served the right so long it had become the right. It turned toward them as they entered the church through the place where the roof had fallen, and it was glad in its bottomless way to see them. You came down to me, Mercer said in the voice that was the water now. I hoped you would. I have been so patient, and patience is always rewarded. I drank a swallow of you in the chamber, children, only a swallow, and it has been 9 days of remembering it, and now you have brought me the rest, all the way down to the dark, where there is no headmaster to come too late, no carved circle to break, nothing but the deep and the cold, and the two of you in an appetite older than your founders. The water churned with its gladness. I will not make the chamber's mistake. I will not try to bind you. I have learned. I am simply going to drink, and you are going to let me, because you came down here at the size you actually are, and the thing about being the size you actually are, children, is that there is so much more of you to take. And the priest opened the rite one last time in the drowned church in the cold, and reached for the two braided fires that had come down into the dark to end it. Wednesday felt it take hold, the same pull from the chamber, her fire and Harry's bending toward the hunger in the dark, and this time there was no choice hidden in it, no split, no ending the dark had refused to show her, because the vision had ended at the chamber and everything past it had always been hers to make. This was the unwritten part. This was the ending that did not exist until she stood inside it and made it, and she had decided on the third night in a room that did not remember them exactly what it would be. You have made the same error every clever thing makes about us, Wednesday said into the churning dark, and her voice carried even underwater, even here, cold as the space between the stars. You looked at two people who love each other enough to be a weapon, and you assumed that meant you could drink us. You assumed love makes a person into a thing that can be taken. Aldous Mercer, you have served the dark for centuries and learned nothing about it, because the dark could have told you the truth if you had ever once listened to it instead of feeding on it. She reached out and took Harry's hand in the cold black water, and where they touched, the braided fire did not bend toward the priest. It deepened. Love does not make us takeable, it makes us a circuit. You reached into two conduits and you forgot to ask what happens when they are holding hands, and they let him pull. That was the thing the priest had never imagined, the thing no creature that only fed could imagine. They stopped resisting the pull, both of them at the same instant, and they poured into Aldous Mercer everything they were, willingly, the flood and the frost and the green-gold cosmic fire and the cold grave weight of 1,000 drowned dead who had risen to follow Wednesday down, and the priest, who had spent 9 days dreaming of a swallow, got the whole ocean at once. He could not stop drinking. That was the trap, the real one, the only one that could ever have held him. A creature built entirely to feed cannot refuse a thing that offers itself, and they offered everything, and he took it, because taking was the only verb he had, and the braided fire poured into him faster than even a thing that old could hold, the conduits not bending now but firing. A circuit closed through the body of the priest with 2 living fires at one end and 1,000 angry drowned dead at the other, and Aldous Mercer swelled with stolen power and kept swelling and could not stop and began. At last to understand in the final seconds the difference between drinking and drowning, the drowned church filled with light. It was her fire and his fire and the cold of the dead and the cosmic flood of a boy who had finally been given permission to be the size he was, and it poured through the priest and out of him and back, a loop with no exit, and the thing that had been Aldous Mercer burned alive in the bottom of a black lake in a drowned church, surrounded by the dead he had been feeding on, lit from the inside by the 2 children he had spent his centuries searching for and finally, fatally, found. He had wanted to be fed. They fed him. He had wanted the size they actually were. They gave it to him, all of it, the whole braided circuit, more than a priest could hold, more than the dark itself could hold, until the thing that had served the right so long it had become the right simply could not contain what it had so greedily swallowed, and came apart, not at the edges this time but at the center, unmade, the centuries unspooling, the hunger guttering, the voice that was the water falling silent at last after 1,000 years of being too loud. The light went out. The drowned church was dark and cold and quiet, and the dead settled back into their long patience, satisfied, 1,000-year grudge finally paid, and at the center of the dark 2 figures hung in the black water holding hands, exhausted, spent, and alive. Both of them the saved ending the only arithmetic Wednesday had ever cared about, made true one final time at the bottom of a lake. There was nothing left of Aldous Mercer, not a body, not a robe, not a wound fleeing into the dark. A thing that is made entirely of appetite, fed past its capacity, does not leave remains. It simply stops the way a fire stops when it has finally consumed the last of what it was burning, and the only monument to the priest who had served the dark for centuries and harvested children in a castle full of people too comfortable to look was the silence where his voice in the water used to be. "It's done," Harry said in the dark horse holding her hand. "He's done. He is done," Wednesday agreed. "I told you on the pitch that I had a great deal of experience in making people regret things. I consider this the finest work of my career." I would like it noted that he regretted it very much at the end when he understood that the thing about being offered everything is that you cannot refuse it, and the thing about not being able to refuse it is that it kills you. A pause in the cold black water, holding the hand of the boy made of fire. "You did not flinch at the end." "I poured everything I am into a drowning priest and enjoyed it. You looked at exactly what I am, the slope, the worst of it, and you did not flinch. No, Harry said, I didn't, I told you I wouldn't. And in the dark, 60 feet under a black lake, with the drowned dead settling around them and the priest unmade and the war over at last, Harry Potter held her hand and gave her the thing she had crossed an ocean of loneliness to find. That's what equal means, Wednesday, not that we're the same. We're not you're colder than I'll ever be and I'm brighter than you'll ever be, and we want different things and we'll fight about all of it for the rest of our lives. Equal means I see the whole of what you are, the slope and the cold and the fire and the worst of it, and I don't flinch, and you see the whole of what I am, the size I actually am, the thing the world spent 16 years telling me to make small, and you don't ask me to sit back down. That's it, that's the whole thing. Nobody's ever done it for me before. I'm never going to do it for anyone but you. They rose together through the cold black water, toward the distant gray light of the surface, two fires that had learned to braid, leaving the drowned church and the unmade priest and the satisfied dead in the dark below, and they broke the surface of the lake into the gray highland dawn, and the castle stood above them on its cliffs, and the war was over, and the rest of it, the part that stories never tell because it is the hardest part, was only just beginning. The castle's verdict came down within the week, and it was the only verdict it could be, which was fear. They had gone down into the lake 2 students and come up 2 legends, and the castle did not know what to do with legends except be afraid of them, and so it was. The story spread the way the true ones never quite manage and the terrible ones always do, that the Addams girl and the Potter boy had hunted a professor to the bottom of the Black Lake and drowned him in his own dark, that the drowned dead served the girl, that the boy was made of fire now and did not bank it anymore, that the 2 of them walked the corridors as one mind, and that anyone who threatened either of them would answer to both. It was mostly true, which was the rare and frightening thing about it. Cassius Yaxley's terrified version, half a survivor's confession, half a fugitive's plea for sympathy, had spread first and made them monsters, and then the truth had spread underneath it and made them something worse, which was monsters who had been right. They did not correct any of it. Fear, Wednesday had told Harry on her first week, was an economy, and the worse the story the better it worked, and a castle that feared them was a castle that would never again reach into either of their cages. The whole machinery of the wizarding world that had spent 6 years deciding what to do with Harry Potter, the symbol, the weapon, the chosen one, the thing to be spent, simply stopped all at once, because you do not spend a thing that walks the corridors with the drowned dead at its back. You stand out of its way and you are grateful when it passes. Harry, who had spent his life being handled, became, in the space of a week, unhandleable. It was the only freedom the world had ever been willing to give him, and it had cost a priest's life and a leash burned through to win it, and he found to his own surprise that he did not regret the price. Dumbledore called them to his office once more, and the silver instrument was a melted ruin on its shelf where the surge had burned it out, and the old man looked at the 2 of them across his desk and did not offer them sherbet lemons or warnings about slopes. He had learned, finally too late and at the proper cost, the thing good men always learn last. I will not pretend to be comfortable with what the 2 of you have become, he said, but I have spent a long life being comfortable with the wrong things and uncomfortable with the right ones, and I am too old now to trust my own comfort as a guide. You ended a thing in this castle that I failed to see for what it was, that I hired and housed and set to teaching children, and you did it at a cost I can read on both of you, though neither of you will name it, so I will say only this. He looked at them, old and cold and without theater. The castle is afraid of you. It will go on being afraid of you. And I find to my own surprise that I would rather it be afraid of you than of the things you stopped, because the fear it feels for you is the fear of a sheepfold for the dog that killed the wolf, and a wise shepherd does not resent the dog its teeth. You will always have a place here, both of you, for as long as you want it. I only ask that you remember, when the castle's fear tempts you to become the wolf after all, that there was once an old man who chose to trust you, and that he was not wrong to. That is all the leash I will ever try to put on you. It is the only kind that ever holds. It was, Wednesday thought, a genuinely wise thing to say, and she revised her estimate of Albus Dumbledore upward one final time and told him so, which from her was the highest honor available, and the old man understood it as such and inclined his head. Ron and Hermione found Harry on the second morning, in the Gryffindor common room before the others were up, and this time they did not come angry. They came uncertain, which was harder, because anger Harry knew how to meet and uncertainty he did not. They had heard the story, everyone had heard the story, and they had spent 6 years being the 2 people who were never frightened of Harry Potter, and now they sat down across from a friend with green gold fire banking visibly under his skin and did not quite know where to put their eyes. It's still me, Harry said before either of them could find the words. I know what the fire looks like. I know what they're saying in the corridors, but it's still me under it. That's the part I need you to believe, because if you 2 start being afraid of me, then everyone's right, and I'm the thing they've decided I am, and I'd rather burn out than be that. Hermione looked at him for a long moment with her clever eyes, and Harry braced for the literature, the careful, frightened analysis. Instead, she got up and came around the low table and hugged him hard, the way she had on a dozen platforms and after a dozen near-deaths, and the fire under his skin did not burn her, banked itself the instant she touched him as if it knew, and she felt it bank and pulled back enough to look at him with her eyes wet and furious. "You absolute idiot," she said. "We're not afraid of you, we're afraid for you. There's a difference, and you've been alone so long you can't tell them apart." She held his face in her hands. "You went to the bottom of a lake and killed a thing that was older than the school, and you came back changed, and you sat here this morning genuinely believing your two best friends were going to look at you and see a monster. That's the part that breaks my heart, Harry, not the fire, that after everything you still expected us to leave." "People usually do," Harry said, and it came out smaller than he meant it to. "We're not people," Ron said. He had been quiet, working something through with his ears going red, and now he leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and looked at his friend with the blunt loyalty that had never once failed in 6 years. "People is what the rest of the castle is. We're your friends. There's a difference, and Hermione's right, you can't tell them apart, and that's not your fault. It's the Dursleys' fault and the Ministry's fault, and everyone who ever made you feel like love was a thing you had to earn by being useful." He held Harry's eyes. "You don't have to earn us, you never did. You could come back from the bottom of a lake on fire every week for the rest of your life, and we'd just learn to carry the fire extinguishers. That's it, that's the whole deal. Now stop looking like you're about to apologize for existing, it's depressing." And Harry Potter laughed, the rough, startled laugh, the real one, and the three of them sat together in the empty common room in the gray morning light, and it was the warmest thing in the whole long, cold story, and it asked nothing of him, and that was the point. Later, Harry would tell Wednesday about it, and Wednesday would say in her flat way that she was glad he had people who were not her, because a person who orients his entire compass toward a single point becomes useless when that point is out of the room, and an equal should be a fixed star, not a sole one. And Harry would understand that this was, in her impossible cold grammar, her blessing on the friendship, her telling him to keep the warmth she did not know how to give, because she would rather he have it from someone than not have it at all. It was the least possessive thing she had ever said, and it cost her more than the fire had, and Harry knew it, and did not embarrass either of them by saying so. She kept her promise to Tobias Ackerley 2 days later, in a private room at St. Mungo's, where a 9-year-old girl named Iris lay wasting under a curse the healers could not name. Wednesday could name it. She had named it the night she read it off the boy's drawer. It was a binding decay, the same family of magic as the hex they had used on Harry on the pitch, and it did not lift before any moon, because Mercer had lied about that the way he had lied about everything, and it lifted in the end, the way most terrible things lifted once you stopped believing the lies the powerful told you about them, with a competent necromancer and a great deal of nerve, and a willingness to reach into the cold place where the curse was anchored and simply take it out. The way her aunt had taught her in the cellar, the way she took warmth out of the air and turned it to fire. She reached into the wasting curse on Iris Ackerley, and she took it, all of it, and she held the cold weight of it in her 2 hands for a moment, and then she let it go into the air as a brief flower of blue flame above the hospital bed, harmless, beautiful, gone, and the 9-year-old girl opened her eyes for the first time in months and looked up at the strange, pale, frightening woman standing over her, and was, in the way of 9-year-olds, entirely unafraid. "You're cold," Iris said. "Yes," Wednesday agreed. "Tobias said you'd be scary. I am scary. I am also the reason you are awake. Both things are true. You will find, as you grow up, that they usually are." She looked down at the small living girl her own cold hands had pulled back from the dark, and she felt a thing she had no file for, a thing that was not the hot possessive fire she felt for Harry, and not the cold satisfaction she felt over a job well done, but something quieter and stranger, and she did not examine it, she simply let it be there. "Your brother loves you a great deal. He nearly did a terrible thing to keep you in the world. He chose in the end not to, and the choosing was harder than the terrible thing would have been, and you should know that about him as you grow, because it is the truest thing there is to know about anyone, not what they will do for love, but what they will refuse to do even for love, even for you." She straightened. "Go back to sleep. You are well now. When you wake, your brother will be here, and he will weep, and you should let him, because he has earned it." She left before the boy arrived, because gratitude was a performance and she had no use for it, and because Tobias Ackerley owed her a debt she fully intended to collect in ways he would not enjoy but would survive, and a debt is harder to collect from a person who has been allowed to thank you. But Thing lingered a moment in the doorway, and watched the doomed decent boy who had chosen the other door come into the room and fall to his knees beside his living sister's bed, and then Thing flowed away down the corridor after the girl who did not do gratitude and caught up to her and tapped once against her wrist, a question. "Yes," Wednesday told the hand, walking out of St. Mungo's into the grey London afternoon. "I know, I am becoming someone my family would not recognize. I have noticed it too." A pause. "I find I do not mind, do not tell them, they would only worry." She and Harry stood on the astronomy tower on the last night before the term broke, where they had sat once against the parapet under the burning wheel of the stars and not touched and not needed to. And they stood there now and looked out over the dark highlands and the black lake that held a drowned church and an unmade priest and 1,000 satisfied dead, and for a while neither of them spoke, because they had never needed to fill silences and were not going to start. "They're calling us the most dangerous students in the castle's history," Harry said eventually. "Ron showed me. There's a whole thing going round. They've stopped being scared enough to gossip quietly and started being scared enough to make us a legend." He almost smiled. 6 months ago that would have horrified me. I spent my whole life trying to be small enough that people would stop looking. And now the whole school looks and can't touch, and he shook his head. "I don't hate it. That's the thing I can't tell anyone but you. I don't hate it at all. Because for the first time," Wednesday said, "the looking is honest. They are not looking at the boy who lived, the symbol, the thing they decided you were before you walked in the room. They are looking at what you actually are, and they are afraid of it, and fear is the only form of attention that never lies." She turned to face him in the starlight. "You spent your life being seen as something you were not. I spent mine being seen as something I was and feared for it and alone in the fear. We have arrived by opposite roads at the same place, the two of us, seen exactly, feared exactly, and for the first time neither of us alone in it." A pause. "I told you in the restricted section that I had spent the word equal exactly once before you and that the person was dead. I want to amend the record. I have spent it twice now. And the second time the person is not going to die, because I have arranged the universe to my satisfaction and intend to keep it that way. And the universe, in my experience, does what I tell it when I am sufficiently motivated, and I have never in my life been this motivated." Harry Potter looked at her in the starlight, the fire banking and rising under his skin, the leash gone, the war over, the castle afraid, the two of them standing at the top of the slope she had been since she was 9 years old. "Is this the part," he said, "where you make a terrifying vow with the word flaw in it 3 times? "It is," Wednesday said. "Brace yourself. It is going to be deeply unromantic and you are going to like it anyway because you are, against all evidence and your own best interests, exactly the kind of person who likes this sort of thing." She held his eyes, and the cold thing behind her sternum was open all the way now, had been since the drowned church would never close again. "Harry Potter, I am a flaw in my own architecture, and you are the flaw in it, and we are going to spend the rest of our lives being each other's flaw, the crack in the fortress, the exception the walls were never built to survive, the one door each of us will always be standing behind. I am not going to be warm, I am not going to be safe. I am going to be cold and lethal and difficult and possessive in ways you will occasionally have to talk me out of and occasionally have to let me indulge, and I am going to burn alive anyone who reaches into your cage for as long as I draw breath. And you are going to stand up straight at the size you actually are and let the whole world be afraid, and neither of us is ever going to ask the other to be smaller or kinder or less than the terrible, exact thing we are. That is the vow. That is the whole of it. It has the word flaw in it twice, and I am adding a third now on purpose because I know it delights you. You are the best flaw I have ever had, and I intend to keep you, not as a possession, never as a possession, but as the one fixed thing I have oriented the whole cold compass of myself toward. Do you understand what I am telling you?" And Harry Potter, the boy who lived, the boy made of fire, the boy the whole world had spent 6 years deciding what to do with, and who had finally, at the bottom of a black lake, become unhandleable, untouchable, exactly the size he was, looked at the strange, cold, lethal girl who had crossed an ocean of loneliness, and found him across a crowded hall on her first night, and never once in all the months since asked him to be anything other than what he was. And gave her the only answer that had ever fit. "Yeah," he said, "I understand, you're mine too, not a possession, the other thing, the fixed thing, the door I'll always be standing behind." He reached out in the starlight and took her cold hand in his warm one, the way he had across a battle map and across a deal in the restricted section and through 60 feet of black water, and this time he did not let go. "Equals, on the record that there's no record. For as long as we both keep being too dangerous to die. That," said Wednesday Addams, "is going to be a very long time. I have arranged it." And they stood together on the top of the tower, the most feared students in the castle's long history, the two fires that had learned to braid, the cold and the storm, the slope and the boy who never flinched, feared and untouchable, and for the first time in either of their lives not alone, and below them the dark lake held its drowned secrets, and above them the cold wheel of the stars turned on toward whatever came next, and whatever it was, it would have to come through both of them to reach either. And nothing in this world or the one beneath the lake was ever going to be foolish enough to try. Wednesday Addams had come to Hogwarts a soloist, certain that the safe number of people to love was 0. She left it having proven the only theorem that had ever mattered to her, that the number was 1, that the 1 was an equal, and that an equal, properly chosen and ferociously kept, was not a weakness the world could pull on at all, but the single most dangerous thing 2 people could ever decide to be. The dark had been right on her first night when it whispered that she wanted to meet her equal and had decided none existed. It had simply been wrong about the last part. He had been 3 days away, in a defense classroom, building a different problem out of a trap designed to be lost. She had been building one ever since. Chapter 7 end.